You are not waking up tired because something is wrong with your sleep. You are waking up tired because, for most of human history, waking up was never meant to feel like recovery at all. A human body that woke up fully restored would have been wasting energy it could not afford, in environments where survival depended on carrying fatigue forward, not erasing it. What feels like a problem today may be the quiet trace of a system that was never designed to give you a clean beginning. The unsettling part is not that your body fails you in the morning, but that it might still be doing exactly what it was shaped to do. So why does it feel like something is already missing the moment you open your eyes, and why do humans wake up already tired? The idea that sleep should return the body to a clean, complete state feels natural today, but this expectation is not as old as the human body itself. It is a quiet assumption built slowly, shaped by environments that are recent when compared to the long stretch of human existence. When a person wakes and notices a lingering heaviness, a dull resistance in the muscles, or a mind that has not fully cleared, it often feels like a small failure. Something must have gone wrong during the night. Yet this interpretation depends on a belief that the body is designed to erase the past each time it rests. The deeper question is whether that belief ever matched the conditions in which the human body first took shape. In earlier environments, sleep was not a sealed period of perfect recovery. It was a fragile interval, exposed to temperature shifts, sounds, the presence of others, and the uncertainty of open landscapes. A human lying down did not enter a protected state separated from the world. The ground held the memory of the day's heat or cold. The air carried movement. Light changed gradually rather than switching off. In such conditions, the body could not afford to enter a mode of complete disconnection. It remained partially alert, even while resting. This meant that the boundary between rest and wakefulness was softer than it appears now. From a biological perspective, this softness matters. The systems that regulate energy, attention, and repair did not evolve in a setting where they could fully shut down and then restart without cost. Instead, they learned to operate across continuity. Fatigue was not treated as something to be fully erased each night, but as something to be managed across time. A portion of it remained, carried forward, adjusted, redistributed. This is not a malfunction. It is a way of avoiding risk in environments where sudden vulnerability could be dangerous. Archaeological and anthropological interpretations of early human life do not show clear evidence of long, uninterrupted sleep cycles as a universal pattern. While direct measurement is not possible, the indirect signs point to variability. Groups rested in shifts. Individuals responded to environmental cues. Periods of quiet wakefulness were part of the night. In this context, the idea of waking up entirely restored becomes less certain. The body was not returning to zero. It was continuing from where it had paused. The modern environment introduces a different structure. Darkness can be controlled. Temperature can be stabilized. External threats are reduced in many settings. These conditions make it possible to imagine sleep as a complete break, a boundary that divides one day from the next. Over time, this possibility turns into an expectation. When the expectation is not met, the sensation of tiredness feels out of place, as if it does not belong. Yet the sensation itself may not have changed as much as the meaning attached to it. Looking back toward the origin of the human body, the pattern becomes clearer. Early humans moved across landscapes that required constant adjustment. Energy was spent unevenly. Food was not always predictable. Rest could not be perfectly timed. Under these conditions, it would not be efficient for the body to invest in a full reset every time it lay down. Such a reset would require resources that were not consistently available. Instead, the body favored partial recovery, enough to continue, but not enough to remove all traces of effort. This creates a subtle continuity between days. The fatigue of yesterday becomes the starting point of today, slightly reduced, slightly reshaped, but not entirely gone. Over long periods, this continuity supports survival. It prevents the body from overcommitting to short-term restoration at the cost of long-term stability. When viewed in this way, waking up with some degree of tiredness is not a sign that the system failed overnight. It is a sign that the system never aimed for complete erasure to begin with. The difficulty arises when a body shaped by that long history is placed into a modern framework that promises something different. The expectation of total renewal becomes a standard, even though the underlying biology still carries older assumptions. The result is a quiet mismatch. The body continues to operate on continuity, while the mind interprets any remaining fatigue as an error. This mismatch does not need to be dramatic to be felt. It appears in small moments, in the first minutes after waking, when the day has not yet begun but already seems to require effort. Seen through this lens, the experience of waking up tired begins to shift in meaning. It is no longer only a question of what went wrong during the night. It becomes a question of what the body was ever designed to do during that time. If the original function of sleep was not to provide a complete reset, then the persistence of fatigue is not entirely surprising. It is a continuation of a pattern that extends far beyond the present environment, back to conditions where rest and wakefulness were never fully separate, and where survival depended on carrying something forward rather than starting again from nothing. If sleep is not a complete reset, then the tiredness felt in the morning begins to take on a different meaning, not as a failure of rest, but as a sign that the body never intended to finish everything during the night. Because inside the body, recovery does not happen all at once. It unfolds in layers that move at different speeds, with some systems adjusting more quickly while others continue their work across longer periods of time. And when morning arrives, these layers do not suddenly align into a single, finished state. They overlap, creating a quiet imbalance that can be felt as heaviness, slowness, or a lack of clarity. And in earlier human environments, this overlap would not have stood out as a problem, because the transition from night to day was gradual. Light increased slowly, temperatures shifted step by step, and activity did not begin immediately, allowing the body to move through this layered state without pressure. So waking was not a sharp moment but a process, sometimes extending through a period of stillness before full engagement began. And in such conditions, carrying some fatigue into the morning would not have conflicted with the demands of the day, because those demands were also emerging slowly, and from a biological perspective, this gradual transition reflects how the body balances restoration with readiness, since even during deeper rest certain systems remain responsive, maintaining a connection to the environment, and this responsiveness limits how completely some restorative processes can proceed, because the body cannot fully withdraw without increasing vulnerability. So instead of aiming for total recovery, it maintains a middle state where repair continues, but awareness is not entirely lost. And over long periods of evolution, this balance becomes part of the system itself, shaping how energy is restored and how fatigue is managed. And anthropological observations of groups living in conditions closer to earlier human environments suggest that sleep is often flexible rather than fixed, including periods of rest mixed with quiet wakefulness, where individuals respond to environmental cues rather than strict schedules. And in such patterns, waking does not produce an immediate sense of full readiness, because readiness itself is something that builds over time, and when compared to the modern environment, the difference becomes clearer, because artificial lighting can extend activity late into the night and then end abruptly. Alarms impose a precise moment when sleep must stop, and daily responsibilities often begin immediately after waking, leaving little space for gradual adjustment. So the layered nature of recovery becomes more noticeable. What once blended into a slow transition now feels like an interruption, because the body is still completing slower processes while the day already demands full engagement. And when looking back toward the origins of the human body, it becomes easier to understand why this pattern exists. Since early humans lived in conditions where energy had to be used carefully, food was not always predictable, and movement could be required at any time. So a system that depended on achieving complete recovery before becoming active would have been less reliable. Instead, the body developed the ability to function while still carrying some fatigue, adjusting effort based on what remained available. And this creates continuity across days, where the state of the body is not erased but reshaped. Signals of previous effort are reduced but not removed, influencing how energy is distributed and how the body feels upon waking. And the sensation of tiredness in the morning can be understood as the surface of this deeper process, a sign that recovery is still unfolding rather than already complete. And when this is placed against the modern expectation of waking fully restored, the difference becomes noticeable as discomfort, because the body continues to operate through continuity while the mind expects a clean beginning, and this gap turns a natural state into something that feels like a problem, even though it may reflect the way the human body has always managed the balance between rest and survival across long stretches of time. If morning tiredness is partly the result of unfinished recovery, then waking itself must be understood in a slower and older way, not as a clean opening, but as a continuation, because the body does not cross from night into day like a machine switching from off to on. It carries its previous condition forward, softened by sleep but not erased by it. And this matters deeply for the question of why humans wake up already tired, because the first feeling of the morning may not come from a single bad night, but from the body's long habit of preserving continuity across time, and in the environments where human physiology was shaped, continuity was more useful than perfection. Since survival did not wait for complete comfort, complete clarity, or complete restoration, it required the body to keep moving with whatever energy had been recovered, while still protecting enough reserve for uncertainty, and this means that the sensation of heaviness after waking can be seen as a sign of an older balance, where the body reduces fatigue enough to function, but does not spend all available resources trying to remove every trace of strain. And this older balance becomes easier to understand when we imagine the first human mornings not as clean beginnings, but as gradual returns to a world that had never fully disappeared during sleep, with cold ground, fading darkness, nearby breathing, distant sounds, and the slow arrival of light all forming part of the waking process. So the body did not need to feel fully new, it only needed to become available again, and that difference is important, because modern life often treats waking as a deadline, a moment when the person must immediately become alert, useful, focused, and emotionally ready, while the biological body may still be moving through a much slower transition that began before waking and continues after it. And from a biological point of view, this slow transition is not strange, because many internal systems do not finish their work at the same moment. The brain, muscles, temperature regulation, stress response, and energy metabolism all shift through different rhythms, and the feeling of being tired can appear when these rhythms have not yet settled into the same state, especially when the outside world demands action before the inside world has fully adjusted. And this is where the mismatch becomes clear, because the body carries an ancient rhythm of gradual readiness, while modern schedules often demand instant performance. And when those two realities meet, the person may feel as if something is wrong, even when the body is simply continuing an older pattern of cautious energy use. And looking back toward the beginnings of human life also reminds us that sleep was not only about repair, it was also about protection, conservation, and timing, because a body that used every quiet hour to chase complete restoration might have become too deeply withdrawn from the environment, or too costly to maintain when food, warmth, and safety were uncertain. So the more durable strategy was not perfect renewal, but enough recovery to keep going. And this strategy leaves a trace in the morning. A trace that may feel like dullness, reluctance, or the quiet sense that the day has arrived too soon. And archaeological evidence cannot tell us exactly how every early human slept or woke, but the broader picture of ancient human life suggests variability, exposure, movement, and dependence on environment, not the sealed, temperature-controlled, clock-governed night that many people now imagine as normal. So the modern expectation of waking fully refreshed may be less a timeless human standard and more a recent cultural idea built around controlled rooms, fixed work hours, artificial light, and the belief that rest should erase effort. And once that belief becomes normal, any remaining tiredness feels like a personal failure, even though it may belong to a much older human pattern, where yesterday was never completely left behind, and tomorrow was never entered with an empty body. And this is why the question cannot be answered only by looking at sleep duration or morning habits, because beneath those details is a deeper history of how the human body learned to survive by carrying effort forward, waking not as a blank beginning, but as a living continuation of everything it had already endured. To understand why humans wake up already tired, the next step is to look at sleep not as it appears in a quiet modern bedroom, but as it likely existed for most of human history, exposed, flexible, and never completely separated from the world outside the body, Because the human nervous system did not first learn to sleep behind walls, under fixed roofs, with locked doors, steady temperature, and a silent room waiting for morning. It learned to sleep in changing environments where the air moved, the ground cooled, nearby bodies shifted, insects sounded, animals passed at a distance, and darkness did not mean safety had become absolute. So sleep was not a full disappearance from the world. It was a temporary lowering of activity while some connection to the surroundings remained. And this changes the meaning of morning fatigue, because a body that must remain partly responsive during rest cannot use the night only for deep repair. It must divide the night between recovery and readiness, between restoration and watchfulness, and that division may leave traces when the eyes open, not because sleep failed, but because sleep was never built as a sealed container where all unfinished strain could be quietly removed, and in earlier human environments, this would have been a practical arrangement rather than a flaw. Because a group resting in an open or semi-open landscape could not assume that the night belonged entirely to sleep. Temperature could drop, rain could arrive, a child could stir, a fire could weaken, distant movement could matter. And even without imagining exact scenes from prehistory, it is reasonable to say that the environment placed more direct demands on resting bodies than many modern rooms do today. So the body's sleep system developed around compromise, allowing parts of the brain and body to recover while preserving enough sensitivity to return to awareness if needed. And this compromise helps explain why waking may carry a residue of effort. Because the night itself may have included small adjustments, brief awakenings, shifts in posture, responses to sound, changes in breathing, an internal regulation that continued without becoming a clear memory. And when morning comes, the person may not remember these fragments, but the body has still passed through them, and the result can feel like beginning the day with a weight that has no obvious cause. While anthropology also reminds us that human sleep is not one single universal pattern frozen across all cultures, because studies of traditional and non-industrial communities show that sleep can be shaped by season, temperature, social life, light exposure, and work patterns. And although these groups are not living copies of ancient humans, they help weaken the modern assumption that one long, perfectly silent, uninterrupted block of sleep is the natural standard for every human body. And when we look back toward the deep starting point of our species, the more careful picture is that rest was probably variable, socially embedded, and environmentally responsive, not a private mechanical reset. And this matters because the modern person often judges morning tiredness against an ideal that may be historically unusual. An ideal created by mattresses, clocks, sealed rooms, electric light, and the belief that the night should protect us from almost every disturbance. But the body still carries older priorities, conserving energy, monitoring change, and waking through a gradual return rather than a sudden renewal. So the tiredness felt after sleep may not always be the evidence of a broken night. It may be the felt edge of an ancient compromise, the cost of a system that learned to rest without fully letting go, and to wake not from perfect safety, but from a world that had always remained close. If sleep in earlier human environments was exposed and flexible, then the tiredness of morning may also come from a second truth that modern life often hides, which is that human sleep was probably never meant to be perfectly smooth from beginning to end, because the body does not rest like an object placed in darkness. It rests like a living system, still listening to the world, still regulating heat, still adjusting breathing, still sensing pressure, still responding to small changes around it. And this means that the night can contain many tiny transitions that never become clear memories, yet still shape how the body feels when waking arrives. And in a modern bedroom, those transitions may seem like disturbances, but in a deeper human context they were part of the design, because a body that could drift near wakefulness, settle again, shift position, and return to rest had a greater ability to remain safe without fully abandoning recovery. And this creates a kind of sleep that is not broken in the dramatic sense, but textured, layered, and responsive. And when morning comes, the body may carry the cost of that responsiveness as a faint heaviness, as if rest happened, but not in the clean, sealed way the modern mind expected. And when we return to the starting point of human life, the reason becomes clearer. Because early humans did not sleep inside a world built only for comfort. They slept within a landscape that continued to change after sunset, where cold could deepen before dawn, where wind could move through shelter, where nearby people could stir, and where the boundary between safety and danger could not be guaranteed by walls. So the body's sleep system had to remain flexible enough to protect life while still allowing repair, and that flexibility may be one reason humans can wake with the strange feeling that the night was used, not simply enjoyed, because even during rest the body was doing work, maintaining temperature, preserving awareness, managing energy, and keeping enough readiness to respond if conditions shifted. And this is not a claim that every ancient night was restless or dangerous, because the past was varied and cannot be reduced to one scene, but the broad pattern is reasonable. Human sleep developed in conditions more exposed and less controlled than many people experience today, and that difference matters, because modern people often measure sleep by duration alone, as if 8 hours in bed should automatically produce a restored body. Yet duration does not tell the whole story when the body's older architecture is based on responsiveness rather than total disconnection. And anthropological evidence from non-industrial communities has shown that sleep timing and sleep structure can vary with temperature, season, social life, and environmental conditions, which suggests that the strict modern ideal of one smooth private block of sleep is not the only human possibility. And once this is understood, morning tiredness becomes less mysterious, because the body may have passed through several internal states overnight, some deep, some shallow, some restful, some watchful, and by dawn these states do not vanish into one simple feeling of freshness. They leave behind a mixed condition, a body partly restored, partly alert, partly carrying the unfinished work of regulation, and in the modern world this mixed condition feels more uncomfortable because the day often begins too sharply, provocative, alarms, screens, tasks, and the demand to become useful almost immediately, while the older body may still be emerging through a gradual process, and this mismatch turns natural sleep texture into a personal worry, as if waking tired proves that something is wrong, when it may also reveal that human rest was shaped by a world where sleep had to remain close to waking, where recovery had to share space with protection, and where the body learned to survive by resting lightly enough to return, but not always deeply enough to feel completely new. The deeper we look at human sleep, the less it appears to be a clean escape from the world, and the more it appears to be a negotiated state, shaped by the need to recover without becoming entirely absent, because the sleeping body still belongs to its environment, still responds to temperature, sound, discomfort, hunger, social closeness, and the slow pressure of dawn, and this helps explain why humans may wake up already tired even after believing they have slept enough, since the night may not have been a single peaceful block, but a long series of small adjustments that the mind does not remember and the body still records. And in the older conditions of human life, these adjustments were not meaningless interruptions. They were part of how rest stayed connected to survival, allowing the body to lower effort while still remaining close enough to wakefulness to return when needed. So the first sensation of morning could carry the residue of that balance, a body repaired in some ways but still marked by the effort of staying responsive. And this matters because modern life often treats sleep as a private possession, something that belongs fully to the individual, measured by hours, tracked by devices, judged by how refreshed the person feels when the alarm rings. Yet for much of human history, sleep was probably more social, more environmental, and more porous than that, tied to shared spaces, seasonal rhythms, fire, darkness, weather, and the presence of others. And although we cannot know the exact experience of every early human night, we can say with care that the human body did not evolve first in the kind of protected bedroom many people now consider normal, so the expectation of waking completely renewed may be newer than the biological systems being judged by it. And when returning to the origin of the human body, the key point is not that ancient people were always exhausted, but that their sleep likely served several needs at once: repair, energy conservation, vigilance, warmth, social coordination, and timing. And whenever one state must serve several needs, it rarely becomes perfect at any single one, meaning sleep could restore without erasing, calm without fully disconnecting, and protect without leaving the body entirely new by morning. and this layered compromise helps explain the quiet morning heaviness that seems to arrive before the day has even begun. Because the body may still be carrying the memory of overnight regulation, the subtle work of maintaining internal balance while outside conditions changed. And the modern world makes this more noticeable by demanding a sharper morning than the body's older rhythm expects. Since clocks can force waking at a fixed minute, screens can flood the eyes with information almost immediately, and work or responsibility can begin before the body has completed its slow return from the night. So the tiredness that might once have dissolved into a gradual morning now becomes concentrated into the first minutes of awareness, felt as resistance, dullness, or the strange sense that sleep did not reach deeply enough. And there is a historical irony here, because the safer the modern room becomes, the stronger the expectation of perfect restoration becomes. Yet the body still carries sleep systems shaped by a less controlled world, where rest had to remain flexible and responsive. And this leaves modern humans judging an ancient compromise by a modern promise, expecting a full reset from a system built for continuity. And once this is understood, the question shifts again, not toward blaming the body, but toward seeing tiredness as a signal with history inside it, a signal that points back to nights when human beings rested near the ground, near each other, near changing air and uncertain darkness, never entirely separate from the world, and never fully released from the need to continue. So waking already tired may be one of the quiet ways the ancient structure of sleep still shows itself inside a life that now asks the body to behave as if every morning should begin from zero. The tiredness that appears in the morning becomes clearer when we stop imagining fatigue as something the body simply spends and then removes, because fatigue is not only a feeling, it is also information, a collection of signals about effort, strain, repair, stress, and energy use. And the body does not erase useful information just because night has passed. It carries some of it forward so the next period of activity can be managed with caution, and this is important for understanding why humans wake up already tired, because what remains after sleep may not be only leftover weakness. It may also be the body's way of remembering how much has recently been demanded from it. And in earlier human environments that memory would have mattered, since a body that ignored yesterday's effort might spend too much too soon, move too strongly, or behave as if energy were unlimited, when in fact food, warmth, safety, and recovery time were never guaranteed. So fatigue became part of regulation, not merely a problem to be removed. And this means that sleep could reduce fatigue without fully cancelling the signals that fatigue carried, allowing the body to wake with a record of previous costs still present in the background, softened but not gone. And from a biological point of view, this makes sense because many processes involved in repair and energy balance extend beyond a single night. Muscles do not instantly return to an untouched state. The nervous system does not simply clear all strain, and metabolic systems do not reset as if the previous day never happened. Instead, the body compares what has been used, what has been restored, and what may be needed next, creating a cautious state that can feel like morning heaviness. And when we trace this back toward the beginning of human life, the pattern becomes less surprising, because early humans were not living inside predictable schedules where each day's demands were neatly separated from the next. Movement, gathering, carrying, tool use, cold, heat, social tension, hunger, and uneven sleep could accumulate across time, so the body needed a way to manage fatigue as a continuing condition, not as a single event, and the morning body was therefore not a blank body. It was a body holding a history of use, and that history shaped how much effort felt available, how quickly movement came, and how strongly attention could rise. While the modern world often hides this continuity by treating each night as if it should close the account completely, as if going to bed should cancel the debt of the day, yet the body's older logic is more conservative, because it does not assume that one period of rest is enough to remove every effect of effort, and it may preserve a small sense of limitation as a way of preventing overuse. And this preservation can be mistaken for failure when the mind expects freshness, especially in a life where the morning begins with immediate judgment, checking the body, measuring alertness, noticing whether the mind feels sharp, and deciding very quickly whether the night was good or bad. But fatigue is not always that simple. because the body may have recovered enough to continue while still carrying signs that full restoration has not occurred. And this is not a dramatic claim about disease or damage. It is a quieter point about human continuity, that effort leaves traces, and sleep works with those traces rather than making them vanish. So when a person opens their eyes and feels already behind, already heavy, already less complete than they expected, the feeling may belong to a long biological habit, a system shaped by environments where survival depended on remembering cost, conserving energy, and beginning the next day not from zero, but from the careful remains of everything the body had already done. Fatigue becomes even more important when we understand that the body does not treat all tiredness in the same way, because some tiredness comes from immediate exertion, some from poor timing, some from emotional strain, some from repeated demand, and some from the deeper cost of keeping the organism stable across changing conditions. And sleep cannot resolve all of these layers at the same speed, so morning may arrive while the body is still sorting one kind of fatigue from another, deciding what can be released, what must be repaired more slowly, and what should remain as a warning against spending too much too soon. And this layered sorting helps explain why humans can wake up already tired, even without a single obvious cause, because the body is not only asking whether it rested, it is also asking what kind of effort it has recently survived, and how much reserve should be protected for the day ahead. And in the environments where human beings first developed, such caution would have been useful, because effort was not separated neatly into exercise, work, stress, and rest the way modern life often names it. Instead, the body met a continuous mixture of walking, carrying, searching, waiting, cold, heat, hunger, social attention, and uncertain sleep. And each of these could add a different signal to the body's internal record, so the next morning was not judged by a simple question of whether enough hours had passed, but by a wider balance between what had been spent and what remained. And from a biological point of view, this is why fatigue should not be seen only as weakness, because it can also act as a protective limit, slowing movement, reducing unnecessary effort, and encouraging the body to conserve energy when internal signals suggest that full restoration has not yet been reached. And although modern humans may dislike this limit, the older body may treat it as a form of safety, a way of preventing the organism from behaving as if yesterday left no mark. And when we look back toward early human life, this makes the morning feeling more understandable, because a body that woke with no memory of strain might repeat effort too aggressively, spend energy too freely, or ignore subtle signs of incomplete repair, while a body that carried a measured trace of fatigue could move more carefully, distribute effort more slowly, and protect itself across longer stretches of time. And this does not mean that tiredness is always healthy, or that persistent exhaustion should be ignored, but within the logic of human evolution, some degree of carried fatigue belongs to a system built around caution rather than comfort. And the modern world changes the emotional meaning of this signal by turning every morning into a test of performance where the body is expected to be clear, efficient, and ready almost immediately. So a protective limit that once blended into a slower rhythm now feels like an obstacle, especially when alarms, schedules, screens, and responsibilities press the person into action before the body's slower layers have settled. And this pressure can make the remaining fatigue feel sharper, as if the body is resisting the day when it may be doing something older and quieter, holding back part of its energy until it understands the conditions ahead. And the contrast between ancient caution and modern urgency is central to the question of why humans wake up already tired, because the body still carries a deep habit of saving something for uncertainty, while modern life often demands that everything be spent from the first minutes of waking, and in that gap the person feels incomplete, not because sleep has no value, but because sleep reduces fatigue within limits set by a long history of survival, where effort was remembered, reserves mattered, and morning was not an invitation to feel new, but a careful return to a world that might still require more than the body could safely give. The accumulation of fatigue across time changes the way morning should be understood, because waking does not happen to a body that has been completely emptied of yesterday. It happens to a body that has measured, reduced, stored, and reorganized yesterday's cost, And this is why the first minutes of the day can feel older than the day itself, as if the body has arrived carrying something that sleep did not fully remove. And this carried state is central to why humans wake up already tired, because fatigue does not always disappear when rest begins. It often becomes part of a longer conversation between past effort and future demand. And in the deeper history of human life, that conversation would have mattered every day, since early humans could not assume that one night would provide perfect safety, perfect warmth, perfect food, or perfect restoration. So the body had to manage energy through continuity, preserving information about strain while still allowing enough recovery to keep moving. And this means that tiredness in the morning may not always be the sign of an empty body, but of a cautious body, one that has not forgotten the cost of staying alive. And from a biological point of view, this is important because repair, energy regulation, and nervous system recovery are not simple events that begin at night and end at dawn. They are ongoing processes that cross the boundary between sleep and waking, and when the alarm rings or light enters the room, those processes do not instantly finish. They continue beneath awareness, leaving the person with a mixed feeling, partly restored, partly limited, partly prepared, and partly still waiting for slower systems to catch up. And when we return to the origin of the human body, this mixed condition becomes more reasonable, because ancient mornings were not built around the promise of full personal renewal. They were built around the need to continue within uncertain conditions, where yesterday's hunger, distance, cold, heat, carrying, conflict, or poor rest could not simply be erased because the sun returned. And although we cannot know the private feeling of those mornings, the wider logic of human survival suggests that a body that remembered fatigue would be safer than a body that denied it, because fatigue could slow unnecessary movement, guide energy use, and prevent the organism from spending too much before the day's demands were known. And this gives morning tiredness a colder meaning, not dramatic, but unsettling in a quiet way, because what many people call failure may partly be the body refusing to pretend that life begins cleanly every morning. And modern life makes this refusal difficult to accept, because modern schedules often demand a kind of freshness that biology may not easily provide, with fixed waking times, immediate tasks, bright screens, and a culture that treats low morning energy as a problem to be corrected quickly, yet the older body may still be doing something more conservative, holding a trace of fatigue in place until it can judge what is safe to spend. And this is why the same sensation can feel so emotionally sharp today, because it appears at the exact moment when the world asks for readiness, making the body's caution feel like betrayal, even though it may come from a long history of protection, and the archaeological record cannot show fatigue directly. But the traces of human movement, tools, shelters, hearths, and changing landscapes remind us that human life was always an exchange between energy and environment, between what the body could give and what the world required. And in that exchange, sleep was never a magical cancellation of cost. It was only one way the body negotiated with cost, reducing it, redistributing it, and carrying enough of it forward to guide the next day. So waking already tired may be the surface feeling of a very old rule that the body does not reset because the world did not reset. The body does not forget because effort mattered. And the morning does not begin from nothing because human survival was never built on nothing, but on the careful remains of what had already been endured. The reason humans wake up already tired is not only found in fatigue itself, but also in timing, because the body does not live by the clock on the wall in the same way modern life does. It lives by internal rhythms that were shaped long before fixed schedules, electric lights, and alarm sounds divided the day into exact units, and these rhythms are sensitive to light, darkness, temperature, movement, food, social activity, and the slow signals of the environment, which means that waking can feel heavy when the outside demand for morning does not match the body's inner sense of readiness. And this mismatch is especially important because the human body did not evolve in a world where every day began at the same minute, under the same light, with the same expected level of alertness. Instead, it developed in landscapes where dawn arrived gradually, seasons changed the length of darkness, weather altered comfort, and activity followed conditions more than numbers. So the body learned to rise through timing, that was flexible, not mechanical. And when we place that older rhythm inside a modern schedule, the result can feel like waking before the whole system has agreed to wake, because the eyes may open, the alarm may stop, the room may be bright, but deeper processes may still be moving out of night at their own pace. And from a biological perspective, this is not strange, since circadian rhythms help coordinate sleep, alertness, temperature, hormone release, digestion, and energy use across the day. But these rhythms do not instantly obey social expectations. They respond to repeated patterns and environmental cues, and when those cues become confusing, such as bright light late at night, low natural light in the morning, irregular meals, late stimulation, or waking at a time that cuts across the body's internal phase, the person may experience mourning, not as arrival, but as interruption. And when returning to the starting point of human life, the contrast becomes clearer, because early humans were surrounded by stronger natural timing signals than many modern people are now. Sunlight changed slowly and visibly. Darkness had a real presence. Temperature shifted with the land, and the body could use these signals to prepare for rest and waking in a gradual way. While modern environments often weaken or scramble those signals, keeping the body active under artificial light long after sunset, and then forcing it awake before natural light has fully supported alertness. So tiredness in the morning may not mean that sleep alone was insufficient. It may mean that the body's timing system has been asked to perform outside the pattern it understands most deeply, and this timing problem is different from simple laziness or lack of will. Because the body's rhythms are not opinions, they are inherited regulatory systems, built to organize energy in relation to the world, and if the world presented to the body is inconsistent, the body may respond with caution, delay, or heaviness, as if it has not yet received a clear signal that the day has truly begun. And this helps explain why a person can spend enough hours in bed yet still wake with a dull mind and slow limbs. Because the question is not only how long the body rested, but whether rest and waking were placed in a rhythm the body could recognize. And the modern world often treats time as something external and absolute, but the older body treats time as something sensed through light, temperature, hunger, movement, and repetition. So when those signals are weakened, the morning becomes less certain inside the body, and the person may feel that uncertainty as tiredness, a quiet resistance at the edge of waking, not because the body refuses the day, but because its ancient timing system is still searching for the environmental agreement that once helped humans move from darkness into activity without being pulled too sharply from one state into another. The timing of the human body is especially important because it does not only decide when sleep begins or ends, it also shapes how deeply the body can enter rest, how smoothly it can leave rest, and how much energy feels available in the first part of the day. And this means that morning tiredness may appear when the body has slept, but has not slept in the right relationship with its own rhythm, because a person can close their eyes for many hours while the deeper timing systems remain slightly confused, pulled between signals that do not belong together, such as bright light at night, mental activity late into the evening, food or stress close to sleep, and then a sudden forced waking before the body has completed its gradual preparation for daytime. And in earlier human environments, these signals were not perfect, but they were more directly tied to the outside world, because sunset reduced light in a real way, darkness changed behavior, cold or warmth had to be felt rather than controlled completely, and dawn arrived as a slow transition rather than a command. So the body could use the changing environment to organize its internal state, lowering activity when the world became dark, raising alertness when light returned, and adjusting energy through repeated patterns that were not measured by a clock, but sensed through the whole body. And when we return to the deep starting point of human life, this connection between rhythm and environment becomes central, because early humans did not wake according to a number chosen in advance. They woke within a moving field of light, temperature, sound, hunger, social presence, and need. And this means that waking was not only an event inside the body, it was a negotiation between the body and the world around it. While modern life often removes that negotiation and replaces it with fixed time, asking the body to become alert because the schedule says so, even if the internal rhythm has not yet reached the same point. And this is one reason waking can feel like being pulled upward too early from deep water, not because the body did not rest at all, but because it was interrupted before its internal timing had finished turning toward morning. And from a biological point of view, this matters because circadian rhythm works with many other processes, including body temperature, sleep pressure, stress response, digestion, and attention, and these processes do not all move at the same speed. So when timing is stable, they can support one another, but when timing is unstable, they can become slightly out of step, leaving the person awake but not fully gathered, conscious but not fully clear, physically present but still carrying the heaviness of a system that has not synchronized. And the modern world makes this more common by stretching wakefulness into the night with light and stimulation, then compressing the morning into immediate obligation. And this creates a strange reversal, because the body receives signals to stay active when it should be winding down, then receives a demand to perform when it has not yet been guided gently into wakefulness. So the morning tiredness is not only the remains of fatigue, it is also the feeling of timing being disturbed. And this is different from saying that ancient humans always slept better, because that would be too simple and not supported by certainty. Their lives included exposure, uncertainty, hunger, discomfort, and danger. But the important point is narrower and more careful. The body's timing systems were shaped in relation to natural cues, and many modern environments weaken those cues while increasing the demand for fixed performance. So the tiredness of waking may reflect a body caught between an old rhythm and a newer schedule, between a biology that expects gradual environmental signals and a world that turns morning into an appointment. And when that conflict repeats across days, the body may begin each morning already carrying not only yesterday's effort, but also the quiet cost of being woken at the wrong point in its own internal tide, still searching for the older agreement between darkness, light, rest, and movement that once helped humans rise into the day more slowly. The rhythm of the human body becomes most visible when it is disturbed, because when timing is stable, the passage from sleep to waking may feel almost invisible, but when timing is pulled away from the signals the body expects, morning becomes heavy, uncertain, and slow. And this helps explain why humans wake up already tired even when they believe they have done the right thing by going to bed and staying there long enough. Because the body is not only counting hours, it is reading patterns. And if those patterns do not agree, if darkness arrives too late, light arrives too weakly, meals shift, stress remains active, and waking is forced by a clock rather than invited by gradual cues, then the body may open its eyes before its internal systems have gathered into daytime. And this makes the first part of the day feel like a continuation of night, rather than a true entrance into morning. And when we return to the starting point of human life, this conflict becomes easier to understand, because early humans were surrounded by stronger environmental signals that helped organize the body's rhythm, not perfectly and not comfortably in every case, but directly through the slow fading of daylight, the cooling of air, the presence of fire or darkness, the gradual return of dawn, and the changing demands of the group and landscape. So the body's sense of time was not separated from place, it was built from place, from light on the horizon, temperature on the skin, hunger in the body, and movement in the surrounding world. While modern life often separates time from place and turns it into numbers, alarms, work hours, screen brightness, and social obligation, and this separation creates a strange problem, because the mind may know that morning has arrived while the body has not yet received the older kind of evidence, the kind of evidence it was shaped to trust. And from a biological point of view, this matters because circadian rhythms coordinate many systems that must change together: sleep depth, alertness, body temperature, energy use, hormone patterns, digestion, and attention. And when these systems move in harmony, waking can become smoother. But when they are pulled apart by inconsistent signals, the person may wake into a divided state, where consciousness is returned, but warmth, clarity, motivation, and physical readiness are still lagging behind. And this divided state can feel like tiredness even when sleep has occurred, because tiredness is not only a measure of missing rest, it can also be the felt experience of internal systems not yet aligned. And in the deeper human past, such alignment was supported by repetition across seasons and environments. by the repeated relationship between darkness and quiet, dawn and movement, cold and shelter, hunger and activity, while the modern body often faces a schedule that changes less with nature and more with demand, asking the same performance from the body regardless of season, weather, emotional strain, or the previous night's timing. And this is where the ancient rhythm becomes a hidden source of discomfort, because the body still expects time to be something it can sense slowly, but modern life often presents time as something it must obey immediately, and once that mismatch repeats, waking can begin to feel like being summoned before the body has consented, not in thought, but in physiology, through slow muscles, dull attention, and a quiet resistance that appears before any decision is made. And this does not mean that the past was easier or that modern life alone created tiredness, because human beings have always lived with effort, uncertainty, and imperfect rest. But it does mean that the modern expectation of waking cleanly at a fixed time may be asking an old body to perform a new trick, to treat the morning as a precise command instead of a gradual transition, and when that command arrives too sharply, the body may answer with the only language it has, a feeling of heaviness that says the night has ended outside, but not yet fully inside. A fully restored body sounds like the ideal form of waking, but from the older logic of survival, it may have been too expensive to be the normal goal, because recovery is not free, repair requires energy, immune activity requires energy, rebuilding damaged tissue requires energy, maintaining warmth requires energy, and even sleep itself is part of a larger economy where the body must decide what can be restored now, what can wait, and what level of readiness must be preserved for the next demand. So when humans wake up already tired, part of the answer may lie in a cold biological trade. The body does not always spend everything it could on making the morning feel good. It spends carefully, because for most of human history energy was not guaranteed, and a system shaped in that world would not treat comfort as the highest priority. It would treat survival across time as the deeper priority, and this means that the feeling of partial recovery may not be accidental, because a body that tried to erase every trace of effort overnight would need reliable fuel, safety, warmth, and uninterrupted conditions. Yet early human life likely offered these unevenly, not as a constant supply, so the body learned to restore enough to continue while still protecting reserves for uncertainty. And when we return to the beginning of human experience, this makes the morning body look different. Not like a failed machine, but like a careful organism that has made a quiet calculation during the night, reducing the cost of yesterday without pretending that tomorrow will be easy. And from a biological point of view, this calculation appears in many ordinary ways, since the body prioritizes some needs over others, protecting vital functions, maintaining temperature, regulating blood sugar, supporting the brain, and repairing what can be repaired within the available conditions. But it may not always give the person a strong feeling of freshness, because the feeling of freshness is not the same as the minimum biological state required to keep functioning. And this difference is central to the question, because modern people often expect sleep to serve their experience, to make them feel clear, light, and renewed, while the body may be using sleep to serve stability, not pleasure. And in ancient environments, stability could matter more than sensation, because a body that woke, slightly tired but cautious, conserving energy and moving gradually, might be better protected than a body that woke with an artificial sense of abundance and spent energy too freely before food, weather, distance, or danger were known. And this does not mean tiredness was useful in every case, or that exhaustion should be romanticized, but it does suggest that some remaining fatigue may belong to an energy-saving system rather than a simple failure of rest. And the modern world makes this difficult to accept because it surrounds the person with the idea that comfort should be immediate, sleep should be efficient, mornings should be productive, and the body should behave like a device that charges to full capacity overnight. Yet the human body did not begin as a device. It began as living tissue moving through uncertain landscapes, where energy had to be earned, protected, divided, and sometimes withheld. And this older economy may still appear in the first moments after waking, when the body feels reluctant to spend, slow to rise, and unwilling to give the full force of itself to the day, not because it has no energy at all, but because its deepest systems may still be guarding what remains. And when that guarding meets a modern morning filled with alarms, messages, work, light, and expectation, the guarded body feels like a tired body, and the person may think something has gone wrong, even though a quieter truth may be that the body is still obeying a survival rule written long before comfort became the measure of a successful night. If the body spends energy carefully during sleep, then the feeling of waking tired may come from an uncomfortable truth that restoration is selective, not generous, because the body does not repair everything with equal urgency. It ranks needs according to survival value, maintaining the brain, keeping temperature within a safe range, supporting circulation, balancing internal chemistry, and repairing enough tissue to continue, while other forms of recovery may be slower, postponed, or incomplete. And this selective restoration helps explain why a person can sleep through the night and still wake with heaviness in the limbs, dullness behind the eyes, or a sense that the body has not been fully returned, because from the body's older perspective, being able to continue may be more important than feeling renewed. And when we return to the deep beginning of human life, this logic becomes colder but clearer, because early humans did not live in conditions where energy could be assumed in advance. Food might require movement, weather might increase cost, social needs might demand attention, and rest itself might be disturbed by temperature, discomfort, or environmental change. So a body that spent too much energy on full restoration every night might leave too little reserve for uncertainty the next day. And this means that the body's nightly work was not simply to make morning pleasant, but to keep the organism viable, guarded, and prepared enough to face whatever came next. And from a biological point of view, this is important because repair is not a single process. It includes many overlapping activities, some related to muscles and tissues, some to the nervous system, some to immune function, some to metabolism, and these activities require resources that must be distributed. So if the body senses stress, irregular timing, insufficient fuel, illness, cold, or repeated strain, it may not create the feeling of full restoration even after sleep has occurred. Because the system is still allocating energy cautiously, and this cautious allocation is not easy to feel directly, it becomes visible only through symptoms of incompleteness, the slow start, the reluctance to move, the sense that effort is available but not freely offered. And in older environments, this restraint may have been useful, since survival often depended on pacing, not on spending energy quickly in the first moments of daylight, while modern life reverses the meaning of restraint by demanding fast output, immediate attention, and emotional readiness, making the body's conservation feel like failure. And this is why the idea of waking up fully restored can be misleading, because it assumes the body's goal is to maximize the feeling of energy, when the deeper goal may be to manage risk, preserve reserves, and avoid overuse, and this older goal can remain hidden until the modern morning asks for more than the body is prepared to give, at which point the person feels tired before the day has even begun, not necessarily because nothing was repaired, but because repair did not reach the level the mind expected. And the body may still be holding energy back, not as a conscious decision, but as an inherited pattern of regulation shaped by countless mornings when the world was not predictable, and this creates a quiet historical irony. Because modern humans often have more protection from the environment than earlier humans did, yet they also have stronger expectations of effortless renewal, so the small amount of fatigue that remains after sleep feels more unacceptable than it might have felt in a world where effort was assumed, and when seen through the long history of human survival, morning tiredness becomes less like a simple defect and more like the visible edge of selective recovery, the body repairing what it must, delaying what it can, preserving what it may need, and allowing the person to wake not with a full sense of abundance, but with enough to continue, which may be far closer to the original purpose of sleep than the modern dream of waking completely new. The cost of full restoration becomes most unsettling when we realize that the body may not be trying to give us the morning we want, but the morning it can safely afford, because across most of human history, energy was never just a feeling inside the person. It was a limited biological resource tied to food, warmth, movement, injury, stress, and the uncertain demands of the next day. And this means that sleep could not be understood as a generous reset, but as a careful negotiation, where the body restored what was urgent, protected what was essential, and left some strain unresolved because spending too much on complete recovery might reduce flexibility later. And this is one of the deeper reasons humans wake up already tired, because the body may emerge from sleep not empty of repair, but still restrained by an older rule of conservation, holding back full energy until the conditions of the day become clearer. And when we return to the beginning of human life, this rule makes practical sense, because early humans lived within changing landscapes where the next need could not always be predicted. A longer walk, colder air, less food, social tension, carrying weight, caring for others, or simply responding to the environment. And a body that woke feeling completely abundant might spend too freely before knowing what the day required, while a body that woke with some limitation still present would be encouraged to pace itself, to move more gradually, to conserve before committing. And although we should not imagine this as a conscious strategy or claim that ancient people thought about fatigue in this way, the biological pattern itself is reasonable, since living systems often protect stability by limiting output when resources are uncertain. And from this view, morning tiredness can be seen as the shadow of a protective economy, not the proof that sleep did nothing, because sleep may have repaired enough to keep the organism alive and capable, while still leaving the subjective feeling of tiredness as a boundary around unnecessary expenditure. And the modern world makes this boundary difficult to tolerate because it promises a different story, where the body should recharge like a device, where the night should erase the cost of the day, and where waking should offer a clean supply of attention, motivation, and strength. But the human body was not shaped by electricity, productivity schedules, or the idea that every morning should begin at full capacity. It was shaped by long periods in which survival depended on careful distribution, not maximum output. And this creates a quiet conflict at dawn, because the mind expects proof that rest succeeded, while the body may be preserving energy in a way that feels like reluctance, and the person experiences that reluctance as heaviness, slow thought, or the feeling that something has already been taken before the day begins. Yet the older meaning may be that the body is not giving everything away too soon, and this does not make fatigue harmless in every case, nor does it turn exhaustion into something good. But it does explain why the ideal of waking completely restored may be too modern, too clean, and too separate from the conditions in which human biology formed. Because sleep was never only about comfort. It was about maintaining the organism through uncertain time, and when the body carries that ancient priority into a controlled modern room, it can feel strangely unfair, as if the safest night should produce the freshest morning, while underneath that expectation the body continues to follow a colder rule: repair what must be repaired, save what may be needed, and let the human being rise with enough to continue, not necessarily enough to feel untouched by everything that came before. The human body often feels disappointing in the morning because modern life expects it to behave like a generous system, giving energy as soon as it is asked. But the older body is not generous in that way. It is economical, careful, and sometimes withholding, because its deepest priority is not to make the waking person feel comfortable, but to keep the organism alive across uncertain conditions. And this is why the idea of energy saving matters so much to the question of why humans wake up already tired, because the body may begin the day slowly, not only because it lacks energy, but because it is distributing energy cautiously, holding back full output until it has more information about what the day will require. And when we return to the beginning of human life, this restraint makes sense, because early humans did not live with guaranteed meals, stable indoor warmth, predictable schedules, or protected rest every night. They lived in changing environments where the cost of movement, hunger, cold, heat, injury, and social pressure could shift from one day to the next, so a body that released energy too freely in the morning might become vulnerable later, while a body that began with restraint could preserve reserve for unknown demands. And from a biological point of view, this is not a dramatic mystery. It is the ordinary logic of living tissue, because the body constantly balances use and preservation, increasing output when necessary, reducing it when signals suggest caution, and adjusting internal systems so energy is not spent only according to desire. And this can feel frustrating because the conscious mind may want clarity, motivation, and strength immediately, while the body may still be checking conditions, measuring internal state, and protecting reserves beneath awareness, creating a morning feeling that is not pure exhaustion, but controlled limitation, a kind of slow permission rather than full release. And this is very different from how modern culture often describes waking, because we are surrounded by the idea that a successful night should produce a strong morning, as if the body's duty is to become productive quickly. Yet the body's older duty was never productivity, it was survival, and survival often depends on spending less than one could spend, especially when the future is not fully known. So the first heaviness of morning may be the body's way of refusing to open every gate at once, and in ancient environments that refusal may have blended naturally with the slow rise of the day, with light growing across the land, bodies warming gradually, movement beginning in stages, and effort increasing only as conditions became clear. But modern life compresses this process into a few minutes, asking the person to stand, decide, speak, read, respond, travel, or work before the body has moved through its older sequence of gradual activation. And when that happens, the energy-saving system feels like a malfunction because the person experiences restraint as tiredness, not as protection, and this mismatch becomes sharper because the modern world often removes the visible reasons for caution. The room is safe, food may be nearby, temperature may be controlled, danger may be low, yet the body's regulation is not built only from what is visible now. It is built from long biological patterns shaped across generations when saving energy was not optional, and this gives morning fatigue a deeper historical texture, because the body may carry an ancient rule into a world that no longer explains that rule clearly, leaving the person with the sensation but not the context, the heaviness but not the reason. And so waking already tired can be understood as part of an energy economy that is older than the bedroom, older than the alarm, older than the modern belief that comfort should follow rest automatically. A quiet reminder that the body does not begin each morning by asking how good life should feel, but by asking how much can be safely spent before the rest of the day is known. A body that saves energy does not always feel strong while it is saving it. And this is one of the quiet reasons morning tiredness can feel so confusing, because the person may assume that tiredness means there is no energy available, while the body may be doing something more controlled, keeping some energy inaccessible until it is safer or more necessary to use it. And this restraint is not dramatic. It is ordinary biological caution, the same deeper pattern by which the body reduces unnecessary movement, slows the desire to act, protects internal balance, and avoids spending too much before conditions are understood. And when we return to the early environments in which human life developed, this kind of restraint becomes easier to understand, because energy was not a private comfort to be enjoyed freely. It was tied to the uncertain work of finding food, staying warm or cool enough, moving across uneven ground, caring for others, and responding to changes in the surrounding world. So the body could not afford to treat every morning as a full release. It had to begin with assessment, and that assessment may still appear today as slowness, dullness, or the sense that the body is holding itself back. And from a biological point of view, this means that waking tired is not always only a message about the night behind us. It can also be a message about how cautiously the body is preparing for the day ahead. Because the organism does not know the future, it only works from signals, and if those signals include stress, irregular sleep, heavy effort, low recovery, late stimulation, or an uncertain rhythm, the body may choose a guarded state rather than an open one. And in modern life, this guarded state can feel like betrayal, because the environment asks for instant output. But in older conditions, it may have been part of staying alive, since a slow beginning could prevent waste, encourage pacing, and preserve reserve for demands that had not yet appeared. And this becomes important when thinking about human origins, because the first human bodies were not shaped around the question of how refreshed a person felt in the morning. They were shaped around whether enough function remained to continue through the next stretch of time. And enough is not the same as abundant. Enough can feel heavy, limited, imperfect, and still be biologically useful, which is why the modern wish to wake with full energy can conflict so strongly with an older system built to ration rather than overflow. And the controlled rooms of the present make this conflict harder to see, because when the room is quiet, the bed is soft, and the night appears safe, It seems reasonable to expect the body to give everything back. Yet the body's deeper energy economy was not written only for safe rooms. It was shaped through long exposure to conditions where tomorrow's cost could not be known in advance. And this older economy may still influence how readily energy is made available after sleep. So the tiredness of waking may be the felt form of reserve, the sensation of energy being protected rather than absent. And when the alarm forces the day to begin before the body has completed this cautious assessment, that reserve can feel like resistance, as though the body is refusing to cooperate. But perhaps it is cooperating with an older rule: spend slowly, wait for clearer signals, do not assume abundance too early. And this rule may be especially noticeable in the morning because waking is the moment when internal caution meets external demand, when the body's ancient habit of conservation meets the modern requirement to perform, and the gap between those two systems becomes a feeling before it becomes an idea, a heaviness in the limbs, a flatness in attention, a reluctance to rise, and a sense that the day has arrived before the body has agreed to release itself fully, not because rest was meaningless, but because the human body has long survived by treating energy as something to be guarded, not freely spent. The energy-saving body becomes most visible at the exact moment modern life least accepts it, because morning is when the world asks for release while the body may still be practicing restraint. And this restraint can feel like tiredness, even when sleep has done real work, because the body is not designed to pour all available energy into the first minutes of the day simply because consciousness has returned. It is designed to manage energy across time, across uncertainty, across needs that may not yet be visible. And this older pattern helps explain why humans wake up already tired, since the body may begin the day by limiting output, not as punishment, but as protection, preserving enough reserve to handle what cannot be predicted. And when we return to the beginning of human life, this protection becomes easier to understand, because early human bodies existed in environments where the next demand could arrive through distance, hunger, cold, heat, injury, carrying, social attention, or sudden environmental change. So a body that spent freely at dawn might pay for that freedom later, while a body that woke slowly kept some effort in reserve, and increased activity only as conditions became clear could survive more steadily. And from a biological point of view, this is a sober kind of intelligence. Not thought, not planning, but regulation. A deep pattern in which the organism protects stability by controlling how much energy becomes available at once. And this means the morning body may feel incomplete, because it is not trying to create the feeling of completeness. It is trying to avoid waste. And in the modern world, that difference becomes painful, because people are trained to judge the morning by performance, by how quickly the mind sharpens, how easily the body rises, how soon productivity begins, and how fresh the self appears after sleep. Yet the older body may judge the morning by a different standard, asking whether enough has been restored, whether signals are safe, whether effort should be released slowly, and whether reserve should remain protected. And this creates a quiet conflict between the felt body and the expected body, between the organism that conserves and the schedule that demands. And the person caught in this conflict may believe the body has failed because it does not feel bright, when in fact, the body may be following an ancient rule that brightness is less important than endurance. And this rule is not a romantic idea about the past, because ancient life was not softer or easier. It was often more exposed, more variable, and more physically tied to the environment. But that is exactly why the body's caution matters, since life did not reward unlimited output. It rewarded careful continuation, and sleep served that continuation by restoring enough, calming enough, repairing enough, but not necessarily by giving the person a sensation of total renewal. And when this older economy is carried into a world of alarms, screens, fixed work hours, and controlled rooms, its purpose becomes harder to recognize, because the visible dangers are reduced, but the body's deep rules remain conservative, leaving only the sensation of heaviness without the ancient context that once made it meaningful. So waking already tired can be understood as the meeting point of two histories. One recent history that teaches the mind to expect a fully charged morning, and one much older history that teaches the body to spend slowly, to hold something back, and to rise with caution rather than abundance. And this does not answer every case of tiredness, nor should it turn real exhaustion into something to ignore. but it does show why the everyday feeling of waking less than restored may belong to a wider human pattern, where the body does not begin by offering everything it has, but by protecting the possibility that the day may ask for more than we know. The question of why humans wake up already tired cannot be answered only by looking inside the modern bedroom, because the body carries a much longer record than the room can show, and one way to approach that record is through the indirect traces left by ancient human life, not because archaeology can reveal exactly how a person felt upon waking, but because it can show the kinds of worlds in which bodies spent energy, rested, moved, gathered, worked, and endured. And those traces matter because fatigue is always connected to environment. So when we see evidence of shelters, hearths, tools, paths, camps, bones, food remains, and repeated movement across landscapes, we are not seeing tiredness itself, but we are seeing the conditions that made tiredness part of ordinary human existence. And this helps ground the idea that morning fatigue is not simply a modern inconvenience, because the human body was shaped in lives where effort was continuous, where rest was embedded in place, and where the next day often began with the unfinished demands of the previous one still present in the surroundings. And when we return to the starting point of human history with caution, without pretending to know every detail, the broader picture is clear enough. Early humans did not live in a world where food, warmth, sleep, and movement were separated into clean categories. Instead, these needs overlapped, and the archaeological record often shows that survival required repeated physical engagement with the land, whether through making tools, processing food, maintaining fire, moving between resources, or using shelters that were shaped by available materials and local conditions. And this does not mean every ancient person was constantly exhausted, but it does mean the human body developed in a setting where energy was not abstract. It was spent through direct contact with ground, weather, distance, weight, and social cooperation. So sleep would have entered that life not as a complete escape from effort, but as one pause within a larger cycle of effort, and the morning body would not be separated from that cycle. It would rise from within it, carrying the physical memory of the world it had moved through. And this is why archaeological thinking is useful for this video's question, because it prevents us from treating waking tired as only a private feeling, and places it back into the long history of human bodies that had to negotiate with environments rather than control them completely. While modern life often hides this negotiation behind soft surfaces and closed rooms, making tiredness seem strange when it appears without a clear, immediate cause. But ancient traces remind us that the human body was never built for a life where comfort explained itself. It was built for repeated adjustment, and those adjustments leave cost behind. And from a biological perspective, the body would not need a written memory of such cost, because tissues, nervous systems, energy systems, and stress responses already carry information through sensation, limitation, and readiness. So when a modern person wakes and feels a dull heaviness, that feeling can be understood as part of a wider pattern in which the body remains sensitive to accumulated demand, even when the visible environment looks safe. And this is the bridge between archaeology and morning fatigue, because the tools and hearths of the past do not tell us what a person thought at dawn, but they do show that human life was built around effort repeated across days, and a body shaped by that repetition would not treat each morning as a clean beginning. It would treat morning as another point in a continuing exchange between energy and world, between what had been spent, what had been restored, and what still might be required. So the evidence does not need to exaggerate or create a false certainty. It only needs to remind us that tiredness has always belonged to the human condition, not as a dramatic curse, but as the quiet residue of living in a body that must keep adjusting to a world that never pauses completely. Archaeological traces also remind us that fatigue was not only produced by dramatic exertion, but by ordinary repetition, because much of human survival seems to have depended on actions done again and again, returning to a hearth, shaping a tool, carrying material, processing food, repairing shelter, watching the weather, moving between familiar places, and living inside a landscape that demanded attention even when nothing extraordinary was happening. And this is important for the question of why humans wake up already tired, because modern people often imagine fatigue as the result of a single clear cause, one bad night, one hard day, one stressful event. But the deeper human pattern may be quieter than that, a slow accumulation created by repeated effort that does not announce itself sharply. And when we look toward early human life with caution, the evidence does not allow us to describe every morning, yet it does show that human bodies were used continuously in relation to place, materials, seasons, and social needs. So rest was not a complete removal from labor, it was part of a cycle in which the same body had to return again to the same world, and this gives morning tiredness a historical weight, because the feeling of waking with heaviness may echo a body plan shaped by repeated demand. Where the organism learned not to expect total renewal after every pause, but to carry a record of use across time, and from a biological point of view, repetition matters because small demands can add up even when none of them is extreme. The muscles can retain traces of use, the nervous system can remain slightly alert, stress systems can stay prepared, and energy regulation can shift toward caution when the body senses that demand is ongoing, and this creates a form of tiredness that is difficult to explain in simple terms, because it is not always sharp pain, not always sleep loss, not always obvious exhaustion, but a background state. A low signal that the body has been participating in life for longer than the night could erase, and ancient material remains make this idea more concrete, because they show human existence as practical and repetitive, tied to surfaces, edges, tools, fire, water, roots, and shelters, not as an abstract story of progress, but as bodies returning again and again to necessary tasks. And this does not mean the past should be romanticized or imagined as endless suffering, because human groups also rested, adapted, cooperated, and found rhythms within their environments. But it does suggest that the body's normal operating condition was never untouched. Freshness. It was managed effort. And that managed effort may still shape the way waking feels today, especially when modern life adds mental repetition to physical repetition, replacing long walks across land with repeated alarms, messages, deadlines, screens, and social demands, while the body still interprets repeated demand through older systems of strain and reserve. And when returning again to the origin of the human body, we see that sleep ended life where the environment continued to ask for energy across many days. So the body could not treat one night as a final answer. It had to reduce cost, preserve useful signals, and prepare for repetition. And this is why the archaeological view is valuable, because it gives tiredness a landscape. It shows that the human body was formed in a world of accumulated tasks rather than clean daily resets. And when a person wakes already tired in the present, the feeling may not be only a private weakness. It may be the modern form of an older continuity, where the body remembers that life is not one isolated day after another, but a long return to effort, shaped by the places we live in, the tools we use, the rhythms we repeat, and the demands that wait for us before we feel fully ready. The archaeological view becomes most meaningful when it shows not only what humans did, but how their bodies were required to remain in a state of readiness across time, because the traces of camps, hearths, tools, and movement suggest that life was rarely divided into clear periods of effort and complete rest. Instead, the same body moved through cycles that overlapped, preparing, doing, maintaining, adjusting, and then returning again. And this overlap helps explain why humans wake up already tired, since the body may not experience night as a full separation from the demands of the world, but as a quieter continuation within it. And even without claiming exact details about prehistoric mornings, it is reasonable to say that early human environments required attention that could not disappear entirely at night, whether through the need to maintain warmth, remain near others, respond to sound, or be ready for change. So the body's rest would have been shaped by the need to remain connected, not fully withdrawn, and that connection would limit how completely fatigue could be removed, leaving a subtle continuity that could still be felt at dawn. And when we return to the starting point of human life, this continuity becomes part of a larger pattern, because survival was not achieved through perfect cycles, but through overlapping ones, where the end of one effort was already the beginning of another, and the body had to adapt by carrying information forward, not resetting it entirely. And archaeological evidence reinforces this idea by showing that human activity was tied to place and repetition. with people returning to similar locations, maintaining tools, managing fire, and moving within known landscapes, which implies a form of life where the body was rarely free from engagement, even when resting. And from a biological perspective, this would encourage a system that balances repair with vigilance, allowing the organism to recover enough while still preserving the ability to respond. And this balance would leave traces, not dramatic exhaustion, but a quieter form of incompleteness, where the body wakes into the day still holding part of the night's work, and the modern environment changes how this is experienced. Because many of the visible demands have been reduced, rooms are enclosed, temperature is controlled, and physical threats are limited in many cases. Yet the body's older patterns remain, so the feeling of carried fatigue becomes more noticeable, precisely because the surrounding world appears easier, creating a contrast between expectation and sensation. And this contrast can make the morning feel more difficult than it might have felt in a context where effort was expected. And when we consider the broader history of human life, this becomes less surprising, because the body was never shaped to treat each day as separate from the last. It was shaped to move through continuity, to adapt across time, and to maintain readiness even during rest. And this readiness is not always comfortable, because it means that sleep cannot become a complete release. It must remain connected to the possibility of action and the archaeological record. While silent about personal feelings, supports the idea that human life required this connection, showing patterns of habitation, movement, and repeated use that would not allow the body to become entirely disconnected from its environment. And this leads back to the central question in a quieter way, suggesting that waking already tired may not only reflect what happened during the night, but also reflect how the human body has long been required to exist, not as a system that stops and starts cleanly, but as a system that continues, carrying traces, adjusting gradually, and rising into each new day with something of the past still present, not because something went wrong, but because complete separation between effort and rest may never have been part of the original human design. The shift from foraging lifeways to farming did not create human tiredness, but it changed the shape of tiredness in a way that matters for the question of why humans wake up already tired, because earlier human groups likely lived with flexible patterns of movement and rest that followed resources, seasons, weather, daylight, and social needs, while agricultural life gradually tied more people to fields, stored food, settlement routines, animals, tools, repeated labor, and seasonal deadlines. And this change did not happen everywhere at once or in one simple way, but across many regions it made the relationship between the body and the day more structured, because land had to be prepared, crops tended, harvests gathered, storage protected, and work repeated in place. So fatigue became less connected only to immediate movement through a landscape, and more connected to long cycles of obligation that returned, whether the body felt ready or not. And when we return to the starting point of human life, this transition is important because the body that entered farming was not newly designed for fixed labor. It carried older systems, shaped by flexible survival, cautious energy use, and gradual response to environmental signals. Yet, it was increasingly placed into a world where timing became more demanding, where certain tasks could not wait indefinitely, where seasons imposed pressure, and where stored food created both security and responsibility. And this may have changed the feeling of morning, because waking was no longer only a gradual return to whatever the land offered. It could become a return to work already waiting in the field, work that had accumulated from yesterday and would continue tomorrow. And from a biological point of view, repeated obligation matters because the body can adapt to routine, but it can also carry the cost of repetition, especially when the same movements, postures, worries, and seasonal pressures return again and again. So sleep may reduce fatigue without removing the larger burden of a life organized around recurring duties. And archaeological evidence from early farming societies often shows more permanent settlements, storage structures, tools for cultivation and processing, and changes in diet and workload, though the details vary widely by region. And these traces remind us that agriculture was not only a food system, it was also a new rhythm imposed on the body, a rhythm in which morning could arrive with tasks already assigned by the season, the crop, the animals, the stored grain, or the needs of a larger settled group. And this does not mean farming people were always more tired than foragers in a simple way, because foraging also required knowledge, movement, risk, and effort. But farming made some forms of effort more repetitive and less avoidable, and that matters for morning fatigue because the body may wake not only from the night behind it, but into a social and material system that gives the day a fixed weight before the person has fully risen. And modern life inherits part of this agricultural logic, even when people no longer farm, because schedules, deadlines, repeated work, stored responsibilities, and future obligations all create the sense that morning is not an open transition, but a return to a system already in motion. So, waking already tired can be seen partly as the meeting between an ancient body shaped for flexible energy management and a later human world that increasingly organized survival through repeated tasks, fixed places, and obligations that waited at dawn, giving the morning a heaviness that begins before movement, because the body is not only waking from sleep, it is waking back into structure. As agricultural life settled into place, it did more than organize food, it began to organize time itself, and this shift changes how morning is experienced, because when tasks are tied to land, season, and storage, they begin to exist before the person wakes, waiting in a quiet but persistent way. So the body does not rise into an undefined day, it rises in a structure that has already been set. And this matters for understanding why humans wake up already tired, because tiredness may not come only from the body's internal state, but also from the awareness, even if only felt, that effort is already required. And when we return to the beginning of this transition, the difference from earlier human life becomes clearer, because foraging groups often adjusted movement and effort based on immediate conditions, choosing when to move, where to go, and how to respond to the environment, while farming gradually reduced that flexibility, asking the body to return to the same place, perform similar tasks, and follow seasonal demands that could not be ignored without consequence. And although we must be careful not to imagine all agricultural lives as identical or uniformly difficult, the general pattern suggests that repetition became more central, and repetition has a quiet effect on fatigue, because it does not always produce sharp exhaustion, but it builds a steady background of demand that sleep cannot fully remove in a single night. And from a biological point of view, this is important because the body responds differently to repeated low and moderate effort than it does to occasional intense effort, since repeated effort can maintain a continuous level of strain, keeping systems active, muscles engaged, stress responses present, and attention directed toward future tasks, and this creates a kind of fatigue that carries forward, not overwhelming, but persistent, and when the person wakes, that persistence may appear as a sense of weight before movement has even begun. An archaeological evidence of early settlements, storage areas and farming tools reflects a life where tasks extended beyond the immediate moment, where preparation, maintenance, and anticipation became part of daily existence, and this suggests that the morning body was not only responding to yesterday, but also preparing for ongoing cycles of work. And this preparation does not need to be conscious to influence how the body feels, because biological systems can hold patterns of expectation through repeated experience, adjusting energy use and readiness based on what has been required before. And when we look at modern life through this lens, the connection becomes easier to see, because even without fields and crops, many people wake into systems that function in a similar way, with tasks waiting, messages accumulated, schedules fixed, and responsibilities extending across days, and this creates a continuity of demand that resembles, in structure if not in detail, the agricultural shift from flexible survival to organized repetition. So the body may wake not only carrying the residue of sleep and fatigue, but also entering a pattern where effort is already implied. And this implied effort can shape the feeling of the morning, making it less like an open beginning and more like a return to something that never fully paused. And this does not require exaggeration or the idea that ancient farmers were always exhausted. It only requires recognizing that human life became more structured over time, and that structure can influence how energy is felt, how fatigue is carried, and how the first moments of the day are experienced. So waking already tired may partly reflect the body rising into a system of repetition and expectation that extends beyond a single night, connecting the modern morning to a much older shift in how human beings organized work, time, and the use of their own bodies. The agricultural shift becomes most relevant to morning tiredness when we see how it changed the relationship between the body and tomorrow, because in a more mobile way of life, the next day could still be uncertain, but its demands were often negotiated through movement, weather, resources, and group decisions, while farming made tomorrow more fixed in many places. Since crops would still need tending, animals would still need care, stored food would still need protection, tools would still need repair, and seasons would continue pressing forward whether the body felt restored or not. And this gives fatigue a new shape, not only as the residue of yesterday's effort, but as the weight of repeated future obligation. And this helps explain why humans wake up already tired, because the body may not only wake from sleep, it may wake into an inherited human pattern, where the day already carries structure before the person has fully entered it. And when we return to the beginning of human life, this matters because the body was shaped long before many of these fixed systems became common, with older rhythms built around flexibility, gradual response, and careful energy use. Yet over time, more human communities lived in settled environments where survival depended on returning again and again to the same tasks. And that return could make morning feel less like discovery and more like repetition, less like open movement, and more like re-entry into a cycle that never fully stopped. And from a biological point of view, repeated duty can influence the body even when no dramatic event has occurred, because the nervous system learns patterns of demand, the muscles remember familiar strain, attention prepares for known responsibilities, and energy regulation may become cautious when effort is expected to continue. So sleep can reduce immediate tiredness while leaving the wider pattern intact. And this is why a person may wake with the strange sense that rest happened, but the burden remained. Because sleep cannot erase a structure of life that begins again each morning, and the archaeological record gives this idea a material ground, not by showing private feelings, but by showing settlements, storage, cultivated landscapes, grinding tools, animal management, and repeated occupation, signs that human life increasingly involved maintenance across time. And maintenance is one of the quietest sources of fatigue, because it is not always heroic, not always visible, not always remembered as a major event, yet it asks the body to return, repeat, preserve, prepare, and continue. And this does not mean agriculture was only loss, because it also supported larger populations, stored food, new forms of cooperation, and cultural development. But it did bring a different bargain, more stability in some ways, more obligation in others, and the body that entered this bargain still carried older systems that did not fully understand fixed schedules as natural law. So the morning became a meeting place between ancient flexibility and newer repetition, and modern life extends this meeting even further, because many people now wake not to fields but to calendars, alarms, debts, messages, care duties, screens, and work rhythms that have the same basic structure of tasks waiting before the body is ready. And in that sense, the tired modern morning may carry a long historical echo. From the moment human life became more settled, more scheduled, and more tied to responsibilities that outlived a single day. So waking already tired is not only a story of sleep quality or personal weakness, it is also a story of how human time changed, how the open morning became a commanded morning, and how the body still feels the difference between resting through the night and being truly released from what the day will ask again. Morning tiredness also reflects how human life became layered across generations, because the body that wakes today is not only responding to its own night of sleep, it is also moving within a structure of roles, expectations, and responsibilities that have been shaped by age, family, and social position. And this matters for understanding why humans wake up already tired, because the feeling may not belong only to the individual body, it may belong to the way human groups organize care, work, and time across different stages of life. And when we return to the beginning of human history, even without assuming exact details about prehistoric households, it is reasonable to say that human survival depended on cooperation, where individuals of different ages contributed in different ways. And this means that waking was rarely an isolated event. It was part of a shared rhythm in which some bodies had to rise earlier, some had to remain alert at night, some had to care for others, and some had to take on tasks that extended beyond their own immediate needs. So fatigue could be distributed unevenly across the group, and the morning body would carry not only personal effort, but also the weight of participation in a larger system. And from a biological point of view, this distribution matters because the body responds not only to physical strain, but also to responsibility, attention, and repeated demand. And these forms of demand do not always disappear with sleep, especially when they are tied to ongoing roles, such as caring, protecting, providing, or maintaining social bonds. And when we look at the long history of human life, the structure of generations becomes important, because children, adults, and older individuals did not share the same patterns of rest and activity, and the body at different stages of life may experience sleep and waking in different ways, with younger bodies often having more flexibility and older bodies carrying more accumulated strain, more repeated demand, and more responsibility, and this creates a pattern where morning tiredness may become more noticeable as the body moves through time, not simply because it is aging in a mechanical sense, but because it is holding more layers of experience, more repeated cycles of effort, and more roles that extend beyond a single day. And in modern life, this layered structure continues in different forms, because people wake not only to their own needs, but to schedules, work, family, communication, and social expectations that persist across days. And even when the physical environment is controlled, the social environment can carry its own form of continuity, asking the body to return again and again to responsibilities that cannot be completed in one night. So the morning feeling may include not only biological fatigue, but also the quiet awareness of ongoing obligation. And although this awareness is not always conscious, it can shape how the body releases energy, how quickly attention rises, and how the person experiences the beginning of the day. And when we connect this back to the origin of the human body, the pattern becomes more understandable. Because human beings did not evolve as isolated individuals resting in perfect independence, they evolved within groups where effort, care, and survival were shared, and that sharing could distribute fatigue in ways that were not fully erased by sleep. So waking already tired may also reflect the body's participation in a longer human pattern, where the individual morning is linked to collective life, and where rest can reduce strain but cannot remove the deeper continuity of roles, relationships, and expectations that begin again each day. The structure of generations changes tiredness because responsibility does not fall evenly on every body, and it does not appear only after waking. It often waits through the night as a background condition, shaping the body's readiness before the person has made any conscious decision. And this helps explain why humans wake up already tired, because sleep may rest the muscles and calm the mind for a time, but it does not erase the social position a person returns to in the morning. And in human groups across long history, age and role likely shape the rhythm of rest, with some people needing to care for children, some needing to maintain awareness for others, some needing to carry knowledge, some needing to provide food, repair tools, remember places, or help organize shared life. And although we should not pretend to know the exact arrangement of every early group, the broader point is careful and strong. Human survival depended on cooperation, and cooperation means that the body often carries demands that are not purely its own. So morning tiredness can become the feeling of re-entering a network of expectations, not simply the feeling of waking from sleep. And when we return to the origin of the human body, this matters because humans evolved as deeply social organisms, not as separate sleeping units, and the body's systems for attention, stress, energy, and repair are sensitive to social signals, to the needs of others, to uncertainty in relationships, and to repeated responsibility, which means that a person can wake heavy not only because the body has moved or worked, but because it has remained prepared to respond. And this preparedness may be especially strong in those who carry caregiving or leadership burdens, because the body learns that the day will not belong entirely to itself. And from a biological point of view, this kind of demand can influence the morning by keeping certain internal systems closer to readiness, even when the person is resting. So sleep becomes less like private disappearance, and more like a temporary pause inside a continuing role. And this is why tiredness can increase across life stages, not only because tissues change with age, But because responsibilities often accumulate, with adults carrying work, family, memory, planning, and emotional attention across many days, while older individuals may carry physical strain, changed sleep patterns, and the long record of repeated effort, and in earlier communities, the value of older people may have included knowledge, memory, skill, and guidance. But those forms of value also suggest that the body can remain socially engaged even when physical strength changes. So tiredness may shift in shape rather than simply increase in one direction, becoming less about single effort and more about continuity of duty. And modern life intensifies this in a different form, because many people wake already connected to obligations through phones, schedules, messages, debts, caregiving tasks, and work systems that seem to begin before the body has fully arrived. So the morning is no longer only the return of light, it is the return of expectation, and expectation itself can feel like weight, especially when it has repeated for years, and this connects the modern morning to a much older human pattern, where the body was never fully separate from the group, and where rest could not remove the fact that others might need something again. When the day began, so waking already tired may partly reflect the social nature of human life, the way each person's energy is tied to other people's needs, and the way the body remembers that survival has rarely been a private matter, but a shared demand carried across generations. Across generations, tiredness becomes more than a private sensation, because the human body does not wake into empty space. It wakes into age, memory, role, obligation, and the quiet presence of other people's needs. And this is why the question of why humans wake up already tired cannot be separated from the social history of our species, since humans survived not only by sleeping, eating, and moving as individuals, but by living inside groups where energy was shared, demanded, protected, and sometimes spent for someone else. And when we return to the early foundations of human life, this shared structure matters deeply. Because a person's morning was likely shaped not only by the condition of their own body, but by the state of the group, the needs of children, the knowledge of older members, the availability of food, the condition of shelter, the weather, the route ahead, and the tasks that had to be coordinated. So waking was never purely a personal reset. It was a return to a human arrangement in which each body carried part of a collective burden, and this collective burden could leave traces that sleep alone could not erase. Because responsibility has a different texture from physical effort, it can remain present even in stillness, keeping attention partly prepared, making the body ready to respond, and shaping how energy is released in the morning. And from a biological point of view, this makes sense, because the systems that regulate stress, alertness, and recovery are sensitive to social conditions, not only to muscle use or sleep length, and a person who expects to be needed may rest differently from a person who feels fully released, even if both appear to be lying still. And this is where the structure of generations becomes important, because younger bodies, adult bodies, and older bodies carry different relationships to responsibility, with adults often absorbing repeated demands, older people carrying the history of strain and knowledge, and children depending on others in ways that shape the sleep and waking of the group around them. And although the exact patterns varied across time and place, the broader human fact remains: energy was never only individual, it moved through care, cooperation, dependence, memory, and survival. And this may help explain why waking tired can feel heavier with age or long responsibility, because the body is not only carrying yesterday's physical cost, it may also be carrying years of repeated readiness, years of waking into tasks that did not disappear overnight, and modern life has changed the objects of responsibility without removing the structure, because instead of a fire, a shelter, a route, or shared food, many people now wake to messages, work systems, family duties, financial pressure, caregiving, social expectation, and the silent knowledge that the day has already made claims on them. And this makes the morning feel occupied before it has fully begun, as if the body opens its eyes into a world that is already asking, already waiting, already continuing from yesterday. And when this modern pressure meets an ancient social body, the result can feel like fatigue before movement, because the body is not simply preparing to move through space. It is preparing to re-enter relationship, obligation, and time. And this is not a claim that all tiredness is social or that biology alone can be explained by responsibility, but it shows why morning fatigue often has more depth than a simple lack of sleep. Because humans are not built as isolated machines that recharge privately and return untouched. They are organisms shaped by generations of shared survival, and the morning body still carries that old pattern, waking not only with its own remaining strain, but with the sense that life has always been something answered together, and that no night can fully release a person from the human web they must return to when the light comes back. The space where humans sleep has changed more than the body that enters it, and this change matters deeply for the question of why humans wake up already tired, because the body first learned rest in environments that were open to light, air, temperature, sound, ground, and the presence of other living beings, while many modern people now sleep inside sealed rooms where the world is softened, filtered, controlled, and separated from the body. And at first this seems like a simple improvement, because protection should make rest easier, yet the result is more complicated, because the body's ancient systems still expect certain signals from the environment, signals that help it understand when to slow down, when to deepen rest, when to prepare for waking, and when the day has truly begun. And when those signals are weakened or replaced by artificial ones, the body can wake into a strange uncertainty, not fully guided by nature and not fully satisfied by modern control. And this uncertainty can feel like tiredness, because the body has slept inside a space that protects it from many old pressures, but also removes many old cues. And when we return to the beginning of human life, this contrast becomes clearer, because earlier humans did not rest in spaces that completely separated them from the world. They rested within the world, on or near the ground, near others, near fire or shelter when available, under changing air and shifting light. And although those conditions could be difficult, they gave the body strong information about time, temperature, season, and place, while the modern bedroom often creates a different kind of night, one that may be dark at the wrong time, bright at the wrong time, warm in a fixed way, quiet in a fixed way, and disconnected from the gradual changes that once helped the body move between sleep and waking. And from a biological point of view, this matters because human rhythms are not controlled only by intention. They are shaped by repeated sensory signals, especially light exposure, temperature patterns, movement, and social timing. So when the room becomes too separate from the outside world, the body may lose part of the slow environmental conversation that once supported rest. And this does not mean ancient sleeping spaces were better or safer, because that would be too simple. They were often more exposed and less comfortable, but they were also more directly connected to the natural conditions in which the human body developed. And modern spaces create a new paradox. They reduce danger while increasing disconnection. They make sleep safer in many ways while making waking less naturally guided. And this paradox can appear in the morning as heaviness, because the body has been protected from the world but not fully oriented by it. And the modern room also changes the emotional meaning of tiredness, because when a person wakes inside a soft bed, behind walls, with controlled temperature and enough darkness, it seems reasonable to expect freshness. So any remaining fatigue feels more confusing, as if comfort should have solved the problem. Yet comfort is not the same as alignment, and safety is not the same as biological timing, and the body may still carry fatigue from stress, irregular light, repeated responsibility, and energy conservation, even if the room appears ideal. And this is why the shift in space matters. Because humans move from sleeping within environmental change to sleeping inside spaces that try to cancel environmental change. But the body still carries systems shaped by gradual transitions, and when morning arrives through an alarm rather than dawn, through a schedule rather than light, through closed air rather than changing atmosphere, the body may open its eyes without feeling fully met by the world, and waking already tired may be the quiet result of that separation, the feeling of an ancient body rising inside a modern space that protects it from many things, but no longer tells it, slowly and clearly, how to become morning. Artificial light may be one of the quietest changes in human sleep space, because it does not feel like force, yet it can reshape the body's sense of night. And this matters for why humans wake up already tired, because the body did not first learn darkness as an option controlled by a switch. It learned darkness as a slow environmental event, something that arrived gradually, changed behavior, lowered visibility, cooled the air, and marked a different relationship between the body and the world, while modern light can extend the day far beyond sunset, keeping the eyes, brain, attention, and social life active after the older body would have begun moving toward rest. And when this happens repeatedly, sleep may begin under conditions that are physically dark but biologically unfinished, as if the room has gone quiet before the internal day has truly ended. And from the viewpoint of human origins, this is a large shift, because early humans lived with stronger contrast between natural daylight and night, even when fire or moonlight softened darkness. And those contrasts gave the body repeated cues about timing, caution, rest, and waking, while modern rooms often blur that contrast by bringing brightness into the evening and reducing exposure to natural morning light. So the body receives mixed instructions: stay alert now, sleep now, wake now, perform now, even when the deeper rhythm has not moved through its slower sequence. And this helps explain why a person can sleep in a comfortable room and still wake with heaviness, because comfort may protect the body from cold or noise, but it cannot always restore the older timing signals that organized rest. And the problem is not only light itself, but the way light belongs to a larger modern space. Screens near the bed, indoor work, late messages, closed windows, fixed alarms, and rooms that separate the body from sunrise, air, and gradual change. And together these features can make sleep feel private while making the body less connected to the environmental rhythm it was shaped to read. And in earlier human settings, waking was more likely to be supported by slow changes outside the body, the pale return of light, a shift in temperature, movement nearby, sounds that belong to the day, and the gradual return of shared activity. So the body could assemble wakefulness piece by piece. But in a modern room, waking may arrive as a sudden demand after a night shaped by artificial delay. And that suddenness can make the body feel as if it has been brought forward before it is ready. And from a biological perspective, this is important because alertness is not created only by opening the eyes. It depends on coordinated changes in temperature, hormones, nervous system activity, and energy use. And when evening light, irregular timing, or weak morning cues disturb that coordination, the body may wake into a divided state, conscious enough to know the day has begun, but not fully aligned enough to feel refreshed. And when we return to the long history of human sleep, we can see the colder irony. Modern spaces give people more control than ever before, yet control can also remove the slow guidance that once came from the environment itself. So the person wakes inside a room that obeyed human design, but not always human biology, and the remaining tiredness becomes a sign of that gap. A body shaped by dawn and darkness trying to live inside brightness and schedules. A body that may have slept, but did not receive the older sequence of signals that once helped sleep end gently, and waking begin with less resistance. The modern sleeping space becomes most important when we see that it does not simply shelter the body. It also teaches the body a new kind of night, one that is controlled by walls, switches, screens, clocks, and schedules rather than by the slow movement of the environment. And this new night can make waking feel strangely incomplete, because the body may have been protected from cold, danger, and discomfort, yet separated from the natural signals that once helped it pass gradually from rest into activity. And this is why humans can wake up already tired inside rooms that seem almost perfectly designed for sleep, because comfort alone does not guarantee alignment. And safety alone does not create renewal, since the body still needs rhythm, timing, sensory change, and a believable transition into morning. And when we return to the beginning of human life, this contrast becomes clearer, because early human bodies rested within a world that continued to speak to them through temperature, darkness, dawn, sound, ground, weather, and the presence of others. And although that world was not always gentle, it gave the body a continuous stream of information, telling it where it was in time and place, while modern spaces often remove that stream and replace it with sudden signals. A dark room made bright in an instant, a silent night broken by an alarm, a body lying still for hours, and then required to stand quickly, decide quickly, and perform quickly. And from a biological point of view, this suddenness matters because waking is not one event, it is a coordinated transition involving attention, body temperature, circulation, stress response, movement, and energy release. And when the environment does not support that transition slowly, the person may become conscious before the body feels fully gathered, creating the familiar sense of heaviness that appears before the day has truly begun. And this is the paradox of modern protection. Because the room removes many old difficulties, but also removes the gradual contact that once helped the body understand morning, so the person may wake in a safe space and still feel physiologically uncertain, as if the world outside has not yet given enough evidence that the body should release itself into the day. And this uncertainty is intensified by the way modern life compresses waking, since the bedroom is often connected immediately to screens, messages, tasks, and obligations, turning the first moments after sleep into a doorway, not into landscape, light, and slow movement, but into information and demand. And when this happens, the ancient body is not only waking from sleep, it is waking into a space that asks it to skip the old sequence of reorientation, and the tiredness that follows may be the cost of that skipped sequence, the cost of moving from darkness to duty without enough transition. And when we look across the longer history of human environments, the change is enormous, because humans moved from sleeping within a living world to sleeping inside designed interiors, from dawn as a gradual signal to alarms as commands, from temperature as a changing cue to climate control as a constant background, and from shared environmental rhythm to private schedules. And none of this means modern spaces are bad or that ancient sleep was better, because protection has real value. But it does mean that the body may still carry expectations shaped by older spaces, and those expectations do not vanish just because the room becomes more comfortable. So waking already tired may be one quiet sign of a body living between two worlds. One world where sleep was exposed, gradual, and environmentally guided, and another where sleep is enclosed, controlled, and often interrupted by timekeeping. And in that gap the morning can feel strangely wrong, not because rest did not happen, but because the body rose without the full sequence of signals that once helped humans become awake slowly, safely, and in rhythm with the world around them. The feeling of waking up already tired becomes sharper when it is measured against a belief that may be newer than the body itself. The belief that a person should begin the day in a state of clear energy, stable attention, and immediate readiness, because this belief quietly defines what counts as a successful night, and when the body does not match it, the result feels like failure rather than difference. And this matters for understanding why humans wake up already tired, because the sensation of tiredness is not only physical, it is also shaped by expectation, by what the mind assumes the body should be able to provide after rest. And when we return to the beginning of human life, it is not obvious that early humans would have expected a morning of complete renewal, since their survival depended on continuing through changing conditions rather than achieving a perfect internal state. And although we cannot claim what they felt in precise terms, the broader logic suggests that waking was likely understood as a return to activity rather than a test of restoration. And this difference changes how tiredness is interpreted, because in a world where effort was expected, some degree of fatigue might not stand out as a problem. It might simply be part of the ongoing exchange between the body and the environment, while in a world that promises comfort, control, and efficiency, even a small amount of heaviness can feel like something has gone wrong. And from a biological point of view, this shift in expectation is important, because the body does not directly respond to ideals, it responds to signals, patterns, and conditions. Yet the mind compares the body to an imagined standard, asking whether sleep was good enough, whether the morning feels right, whether energy is present in the way it should be. And when the answer is no, the feeling of tiredness becomes heavier, not only because of what is in the body, but because of what is missing from the expectation. And modern life strengthens this expectation in many subtle ways, through language, advice, technology, and routine, encouraging the idea that sleep should be optimized, tracked, improved, and made efficient, as if it were a system that can be perfected. And when this idea becomes normal, waking tired feels less like a natural variation and more like an error to be corrected. even when the underlying biology has not changed as much as the surrounding conditions. And when we look back toward the origins of the human body, this creates a quiet mismatch, because the body still operates through continuity, selective recovery, energy conservation, environmental timing, and social obligation, while the modern expectation asks for clarity, completeness, and immediate readiness. And this mismatch is not loud, it appears in the first moments of the day, when the person becomes aware of themselves and finds that the body does not match the imagined version of a fresh beginning, and this awareness can shape the entire experience of morning, turning a manageable level of fatigue into a problem that must be explained, solved, or resisted. And this is why expectation matters so much, because it changes the meaning of sensation, making the same biological state feel heavier or lighter depending on what is believed about it. And when we place this back into the long history of human life, the picture becomes more balanced, because the body may be doing what it has always done, reducing fatigue without removing it, waking gradually rather than completely, and carrying traces of yesterday into today, while the mind has learned to expect something cleaner, faster, and more complete. And waking already tired may be the point where these two histories meet. The older history of a body built for continuity, and the newer history of a culture that expects renewal, leaving the person standing between them, feeling the difference before fully understanding where it comes from. The modern expectation of waking fully restored becomes powerful because it is repeated so often that it begins to feel biological, even though much of it is cultural, built from clocks, work schedules, productivity ideals, wellness language, and the promise that every problem inside the body can be measured and improved. And this matters because when a person wakes tired, the body is not only felt, it is judged, and that judgment can make the tiredness sharper, heavier, and more personal, as if the morning has revealed a weakness rather than a normal collision between an ancient organism and a modern standard. And when we return to the deeper beginning of human life, this judgment becomes historically strange, because early human bodies were not shaped around the goal of feeling fresh for a fixed morning schedule. They were shaped around continuing through uncertain conditions, conserving energy, responding to the environment, and remaining connected to others. So the body's older measure of success may have been much simpler and colder, enough recovery to continue, enough alertness to respond, enough reserve to face what is not yet known. And this is very different from the modern measure, which often asks for energy that feels clean, motivation that arrives quickly, and a mind that is ready before the body has fully transitioned out of sleep. And from a biological point of view, the gap between these measures matters because the body may be functioning within a tolerable range while the mind interprets the same state as failure, not because the sensation is imaginary, but because the meaning placed on it is newer than the system producing it. And this is why morning tiredness can feel so emotionally strong, because it appears at a vulnerable moment, before the day has developed, before action has begun, when the person has little evidence except the body's first signal. And if that signal is heaviness, the mind may immediately build a story of loss, poor sleep, weakness, aging, stress, or inadequacy, even though the body may simply be moving through slow activation, selective recovery, and cautious energy release. And modern environments intensify this story because they present the morning as a performance test, with alarms, screens, messages, work, school, family duties, and social comparison arriving almost as soon as consciousness returns. So the person is not allowed to feel the body's gradualness without also feeling behind. And when we connect this to human origins, the contrast is clear, because earlier mornings were not necessarily easy, but they were embedded in a world where effort was expected and gradual transition was possible. While many modern mornings are embedded in systems where the person must prove readiness before readiness has naturally gathered, and this changes the emotional texture of fatigue, turning it from a signal into an accusation, and the body becomes the place where the conflict is felt, even though the conflict belongs partly to the world around the body. And this is why the expectation of full renewal can be misleading, because it teaches the person to ask why the body has failed to become new, instead of asking whether the idea of becoming new every morning was ever realistic for a human organism. And when seen through the long history of sleep, energy, environment, and social life, waking tired becomes less like a mystery with one cause, and more like the surface of many mismatches between clocks and circadian rhythm, comfort and alignment, responsibility and recovery, desire and conservation, modern promise and ancient design. And this does not remove the discomfort, but it gives the discomfort context, showing that the body may not be betraying the person. It may be quietly refusing a standard that was never written into the original conditions of human life. The gap between the body and modern expectation becomes most visible in the first quiet judgment of the morning, when a person wakes, notices heaviness, and immediately measures that feeling against the idea of what a good morning should be, because the body may be moving through an older, slower transition, while the mind has already been trained to expect clarity, energy, and usefulness. And this is why humans can wake up already tired, not only in the muscles or the brain, but in the meaning attached to the first sensation of the day, since tiredness becomes more difficult when it is interpreted as evidence that the self has begun badly. And when we return to the beginning of human life, this expectation becomes easier to question, because early human bodies were not shaped by the promise that sleep should erase the previous day and deliver a clean internal state at dawn. They were shaped by landscapes, seasons, hunger, temperature, social cooperation, uncertain safety, and repeated effort. And within such conditions, the goal of rest was likely not perfect freshness, but continuity, enough repair to keep going, enough awareness to respond, enough conservation to avoid spending too much too soon. And this older goal still lives inside the modern body, even when the modern world asks for something different. And from a biological point of view, this matters because the body does not organize itself around emotional satisfaction. It organizes itself around regulation, balancing sleep pressure, circadian timing, energy availability, stress signals, immune activity, temperature, and memory of recent demand. And these systems may produce a morning that is functional but not pleasant, sufficient but not bright, steady but not inspiring. And when the mind expects brightness, sufficiency feels like failure. And this is the central mismatch of this stage of the story, because modern life has made the feeling of being fully restored seem normal. While the longer history of the human body suggests that partial restoration may be far more ordinary, and this does not mean that people should ignore exhaustion, illness, or chronic sleep problems, but it does mean that the everyday experience of waking less than new should not automatically be treated as a betrayal by the body, because the body may be doing something older, carrying yesterday forward, protecting reserve, moving gradually, and refusing to pretend that one night can cancel every demand placed upon it. And modern culture makes this refusal feel harsher by surrounding the morning with immediate measurement, whether through alarms, schedules, sleep scores, productivity goals, messages, or the simple pressure to feel ready before the day has even unfolded. So the person wakes not only into light, but into comparison. And comparison can turn a normal biological transition into a private disappointment. And when we place this disappointment back into human history, it becomes less personal and more understandable. Because the body is not a clean container emptied every night and refilled by morning. It is a living record of conditions, shaped by millions of small negotiations between effort and rest, safety and exposure, hunger and repair, solitude and social duty. And this record does not vanish because the modern world prefers clean beginnings. It remains in the weight behind the eyes, the slow movement of the limbs, the delayed clarity of thought, and the feeling that the day has arrived before the body has fully opened. So waking already tired may be the point where two ideas of the morning meet, one ancient and biological, where morning is a continuation, and one modern and cultural, where morning is supposed to be a fresh start, and the discomfort comes from living between them, inside a body that still speaks the older language of caution, while the world around it keeps asking for immediate renewal. The feeling of waking up already tired often presents itself as a kind of loss, as if energy was supposed to be there but somehow disappeared before the day began. Yet a more careful way to understand this feeling is not as simple emptiness, but as misalignment, because the body may contain enough energy to continue while still failing to match the state the mind expects from morning. And this distinction matters because humans do not only feel tired when energy is absent, they also feel tired when internal systems are out of phase with the demands placed on them, when sleep, timing, stress, responsibility, environment, and recovery have not gathered into one clear direction. And when we return to the beginning of human life, this idea becomes easier to understand because the body was shaped in conditions where readiness developed through gradual contact with the world, through light, temperature, movement, hunger, social signals, and environmental change, not through sudden commands from clocks or fixed schedules. So a person did not need to feel perfectly renewed in order to function. They needed the body and the world to move into agreement slowly enough for energy to be released with caution. And the modern morning often breaks this agreement, asking the body to become alert before its rhythm, recovery, and surrounding signals have fully aligned, which can make the first moments of the day feel like something is missing, even when the deeper issue is that different systems are not moving together. And from a biological perspective, this is important because the body is not one single battery, it is a network of processes, some related to sleep pressure, some to circadian rhythm, some to muscle recovery, some to stress regulation, some to digestion, some to attention, and each process has its own timing, so waking can occur while some parts of the system are ready and others are still delayed, creating a divided state in which the person is conscious but not fully available to themselves. And this divided state is easily mistaken for a lack of energy, because the mind experiences the whole body as one feeling, not as separate systems moving at different speeds. And when we look back toward human origins, the body's tolerance for this divided state makes sense, because early human life did not require a perfect emotional sense of freshness before action began. It required enough coordination to respond to the environment, enough caution to avoid waste, and enough reserve to continue if the day became difficult. So a certain degree of incompleteness may have been ordinary, not as an ideal but as part of living within uncertain rhythms. And this is why the modern idea of being fully ready can become misleading, because it treats wakefulness as a single achievement, while the older body treats wakefulness as a process of alignment that may take time, and if that process is rushed, the person feels the gap as tiredness, a heaviness that is not exactly weakness and not exactly sleepiness, but the sensation of systems arriving at morning unevenly. And modern life deepens this gap by placing immediate demands on a body that may still be negotiating its internal state. So the first awareness of the day becomes filled with contrast. The mind knows the day has begun. The schedule insists that action should begin. Yet the body still carries night, yesterday, social responsibility, cautious energy release, and the slow work of recovery. And in that contrast the person may say, "I woke up tired," when the deeper statement might be, "I woke before all the parts of me had reached the same morning." This misalignment becomes more noticeable because the modern morning gives the body very little time to become whole again. And the word whole is important here, because waking is not only the return of consciousness, it is the gradual joining of many systems into a workable state. And when that joining is incomplete, the person may feel as if something has been lost, even though the body may be holding energy in pieces that have not yet come together. And this helps explain why humans wake up already tired, because tiredness can be the felt distance between being awake and being fully coordinated, between the eyes opening and the deeper body agreeing that the day has begun. And when we return to the early conditions of human life, this kind of gradual coordination would have had more room to unfold, because morning was not usually a single command delivered by a device. It was a slow change in the world, a shift of light, temperature, sound, hunger, and group movement, allowing the body to gather itself through stages, while modern life often removes those stages and replaces them with a direct demand. Wake now, rise now, answer now, move now. And from a biological point of view, this matters because different systems respond to different cues. The brain may become aware before the muscles feel ready. The stress response may rise before attention is clear. Body temperature may still be low. Sleep inertia may remain for a while, and energy metabolism may not yet match the external requirement for action. So the person experiences one blended sensation of heaviness, but beneath that sensation are several rhythms that have not yet synchronized. And this makes morning fatigue especially difficult to interpret, because it can feel like an absolute lack, when it may actually be a temporary lack of agreement inside the body. And when we connect this to human origins, the pattern becomes clearer, because the human body was shaped to use environmental cues as part of its timing system, not to obey abstract time alone. And if those cues are weak, delayed, artificial, or contradictory, the body may enter the day unevenly, carrying night in one system, yesterday's strain in another, and future demand in another, while the conscious mind tries to name the whole thing with one word, tired, and modern expectation adds another layer, because the person does not simply notice this divided state, they often judge it, comparing the body to an ideal of freshness that may have little relationship to the older purpose of sleep. So misalignment becomes emotional, not only physical, and the morning begins with disappointment before the body has had time to stabilize. And this is why the feeling can be so powerful even when nothing dramatic happened during the night, because small mismatches can combine a slightly delayed rhythm, incomplete recovery, social responsibility, artificial light, fixed waking time, and cautious energy release. And together they create the sense that the body has failed to arrive, even though it is arriving slowly. And in the deeper history of human life, slow arrival may have been more normal than instant readiness, because the body did not need to become perfectly fresh in one moment. It needed to move from rest into action without wasting energy or losing contact with the environment. And this older pattern still appears inside modern mornings, especially when the world outside the body moves faster than the body's internal transitions. So waking already tired may be the surface feeling of a delayed assembly, the body awake but not yet gathered, conscious but not yet aligned, present but not yet released. And this gives the sensation of missing energy a quieter meaning, because what seems absent may not be gone, it may simply not have become available in one clear form. And the first minutes of the day may feel heavy because the body is still trying to turn many separate signals into one livable morning. The feeling of missing energy in the morning becomes clearer when we stop treating the body as one simple container and begin seeing it as a set of rhythms trying to meet each other. Because waking is not only the end of sleep, it is the moment when sleep pressure, circadian timing, recovery, memory of effort, social expectation, and environmental signals all attempt to form one usable state. And when they do not arrive together, the person may feel tired before anything has happened, as if the day has already taken something away, even though the deeper truth may be that the body has not yet gathered itself into a single direction. And this is why humans wake up already tired in a way that feels so strange. Because the tiredness is not always a clear message of emptiness. It can be the confusion of systems that are awake at different speeds. And when we return to the beginning of human life, this confusion becomes easier to understand, because the body was shaped in environments where waking was supported by gradual cues, where light, temperature, sound, hunger, movement, and the presence of others helped the organism assemble morning slowly. And in that older setting, misalignment may have had more time to soften before the day demanded full attention. While the modern world often removes the soft edges of waking and replaces them with sharp commands, so the eyes open under a schedule, but the muscles, attention, temperature, and energy release may still be partly behind. And from a biological point of view, this means the body can be technically awake while not yet fully coordinated, a state that can feel like heaviness, dullness, or reluctance, not because sleep was meaningless, but because sleep ended before all the systems had moved into agreement. And this delayed agreement is made more difficult by modern spaces and routines that weaken the signals the body once used to understand time, with bright evenings, weak natural mornings, irregular sleep, mental stimulation, repeated stress, and responsibilities that begin before the body has completed its transition. And when all of this is placed against the expectation of waking fresh, the mismatch becomes emotionally heavier, because the person does not simply feel a slow body, they feel a body that seems to have failed an invisible standard. And this is where the idea of missing energy can become misleading, because the energy may not be entirely absent. It may be guarded, delayed, unevenly distributed, or still tied to processes that have not finished aligning. And when we look back toward the origin of the human body, this makes sense within a larger pattern of survival. Since early humans did not need a perfect sense of inner freshness before engaging with the world, they needed a workable state, enough awareness, enough caution, enough restored function, and enough reserve to continue, and this older standard is much less generous than the modern dream of complete renewal, but it may be closer to how the body still operates. And this is why waking already tired can feel like a loss even when it is really a delay. A delay between consciousness and readiness, between opening the eyes and receiving the full cooperation of the body, between the external morning and the internal morning. And in that delay we can hear the deeper structure of human life, a body shaped not to begin from nothing, but to assemble itself from what remains, from yesterday's cost, from the night's partial repair, from the rhythm of light and darkness, from the demands of other people, and from the cautious release of energy into an uncertain day. So the tired morning is not only a lack, it is the visible edge of misalignment, the place where many ancient systems are still trying, slowly and imperfectly, to become one morning together. By the time we reach the final layer of this question, the tired morning no longer looks like a single problem with a single cause, because it has become the meeting place of many histories, the history of sleep that was never sealed away from the world, the history of fatigue carried forward as information, the history of energy saved rather than freely spent, the history of biological timing shaped by light and temperature, the history of social responsibility, and the history of modern spaces that protect the body while separating it from older cues. And this is why humans wake up already tired, not always because something simple has gone wrong, but because the body is living inside a conflict between what it was shaped to do and what it is now asked to feel. And when we return to the beginning of human life, this conflict becomes quieter but more serious, because the human body did not emerge in a world that promised clean beginnings. It emerged in a world of continuation, where yesterday's effort, last night's vigilance, the needs of others, the uncertainty of food, the change of weather, and the movement of daylight all blended into the next period of life. So waking was not a personal ceremony of renewal. It was a careful return to a world that had never fully stopped, and from a biological point of view, this return still lives inside us, because the body does not reset like a machine. It regulates, remembers, protects, delays, and adjusts, carrying signals across the night so that the next day is not entered blindly. And this older design becomes difficult to accept in a modern world that sells the morning as a fresh start, a clean page, a proof of discipline, a moment when the person should rise bright, focused, and ready. Yet the body may answer with something older than that promise, a slow heaviness that says the night reduced the cost, but did not erase it, and the day may begin outside before it begins inside. And this is the unsettling value of the question, because it asks us to look at tiredness not only as an inconvenience, but as evidence that the human body is still historical, still carrying the shape of environments that came before bedrooms, alarms, screens, and fixed schedules. And this does not mean tiredness should be ignored or treated as good in every case, because severe or persistent exhaustion can have many causes and deserves care. But it does mean the ordinary morning feeling of not being fully restored may not deserve the harsh judgment often placed on it, because it may belong to the normal incompleteness of a living organism. And when we see this, the story becomes less about betrayal and more about misunderstanding. The body has not always promised comfort, it has promised continuation, and perhaps the first lesson is not to force every morning to prove that the night succeeded, but to recognize that the body may be doing a quieter kind of work, gathering itself slowly, protecting what remains, and bringing forward the record of what life has already required. So the tiredness we meet at dawn may be a message from a long human past, reminding us that waking is not the beginning of a new body, but the return of an old one, still carrying time, still adjusting to the world, still asking how much of itself can safely be given to the day. If the body wakes as an old body carrying time, then the next question is not only why tiredness appears, but why it feels so personal. Because the morning body does not simply report a biological state, it also meets the story a person has learned about what a successful life should feel like. And in that story, waking tired can seem like falling behind before the day has even begun, as if the body has failed to keep its promise. But the longer human history suggests that the promise itself may be the fragile part, not the body, because the body was never shaped to deliver perfect renewal on command. It was shaped to continue through uncertainty, to remember cost, to regulate energy, to rise gradually, and to protect the organism from spending too freely. And when we return to the beginning of human life, this makes the tired morning feel less like an isolated weakness and more like a small window into the deep design of survival, where rest did not erase exposure, where sleep did not remove responsibility, where fatigue carried useful information, and where waking meant becoming available again, not becoming untouched. And from a biological point of view, this distinction matters because the body's systems are not built around the emotional ideal of feeling new. They are built around coordination, enough repair, enough awareness, enough caution, enough reserve, and enough flexibility to meet conditions that may change. So a morning that feels incomplete may still be a morning in which the body is doing what living systems often do, balancing one need against another, choosing stability over brightness, endurance over comfort, and continuity over the illusion of starting from zero. And this is the quiet loss hidden inside modern life. Because as people gained safer rooms, softer beds, electric light, scheduled work, and stronger control over their surroundings, they also gained a stronger expectation that the body should obey control itself, as if protection from the old world should automatically produce freedom from old biology. Yet the body does not forget so quickly. It still reads rhythm, stress, temperature, social duty, memory of effort, and the uncertain shape of the day ahead. And when those signals do not align, it may wake slowly, cautiously, or heavily, while the mind interprets that heaviness as proof that something is missing. And in one sense, something is missing, but not always energy itself. What may be missing is the older agreement between body and world, the slow dawn, the gradual movement, the social rhythm, the environmental cues, and the acceptance that human beings were not meant to rise as perfectly restored machines. And this gives the tired morning a different kind of meaning, not a comforting lie, but a more honest frame, because the body's reluctance may carry information about timing, strain, responsibility, repeated demand, and the limits of recovery. And listening to that information does not require turning it into fear or blame. It only requires understanding that fatigue belongs to a history much larger than one night. And this is the educational value of the question, because it invites a slower relationship with the body, one that does not treat every heaviness as failure and does not treat every morning as a performance test, but sees waking as a process of return, a gradual gathering of systems that have been shaped across generations by landscapes, shelters, tools, seasons, labor, family, danger, safety, and expectation. And perhaps this is why the tired morning can feel so strangely human, because it reminds us that the body is not a clean beginning but a living archive, and every dawn asks it to open that archive again, not with certainty, not with perfect freshness, but with the unfinished question of how much life it is ready to carry forward. The question that remains at the end is not how to force the body into a perfect morning, but how to understand what the morning is actually asking of the body, because the idea of waking up already tired has led through many layers, through sleep that was never fully separate from the world, through fatigue that carries information rather than simply disappearing, through energy that is protected rather than freely given, through rhythms shaped by light and environment, through repetition, responsibility, and generations, through spaces that shelter and also disconnect, and through expectations that may be newer than the body itself. And when these layers are placed together, the tired morning begins to look less like a single problem and more like a quiet intersection where ancient design meets modern demand. And when we return to the beginning of human life, this intersection becomes easier to accept without needing to simplify it, because the human body did not evolve to deliver comfort on command. It evolved to continue across time, to carry cost carefully, to restore within limits, and to wake not as something new, but as something that has survived another cycle. And from a biological point of view, this continuity is not a failure. It is the condition of being alive. Since no living system can fully erase its past without losing the information that helps it manage the future, and this means that the feeling of waking less than complete may be one of the ways the body keeps that information available, not as a clear message, but as a tone, a weight, a hesitation that shapes how energy is used in the next hours. And modern life can make this tone feel uncomfortable, because it asks for immediate clarity, immediate output, immediate readiness. Yet the body may still be asking for something else, a slower beginning, a chance to gather, a moment in which the systems that were separated by sleep can come into agreement again. And this does not require rejecting modern life or idealizing the past. It only requires recognizing that the body carries a longer story than the one day it is entering, and that story does not end when the alarm stops. And this is where the educational value of the question settles into something quieter. Because instead of asking why the body fails to feel perfect, it becomes possible to ask what the body is protecting, what it is remembering, what it is delaying, and what it needs in order to move from rest into action without losing balance. And this shift does not remove tiredness, but it changes its place, turning it from an immediate judgment into part of a larger pattern. And within that pattern, the morning can be seen not as a test, but as a transition, not as a proof of success, but as a continuation. And this continuation carries both the cost and the strength of human life, because the same body that wakes with heaviness is also the body that has endured, adapted, and learned to move forward without requiring perfection. And when the day begins from that understanding, the question remains open in a different way, not asking how to eliminate tiredness completely, but asking how much of that tiredness belongs to the body's deeper logic, and how much belongs to the world that asks the body to be something it was never fully designed to become. And in that open space, the morning becomes less certain, less controlled, but perhaps more honest, a place where the human body does not promise a fresh beginning, but quietly offers another chance to